Hi everyone. So on the Azure Pentest side, so this particular content I try to make it simple as possible. The reason being Azure, right? They have changed some terms now and then actually. So for example, Azure AD earlier it used to be called as Azure AD. Now it is called as Azure Entra ID. Similarly, we used to hear the terms Office 365 like that, but currently they have again rebranded that Office 365 suite name as Microsoft 365. So there would be like many confusing terms, and also on the access part, right? So say for example, if you want to access OneDrive or SharePoint, or if you want to access Azure itself, the access is controlled in a particular service. This kind of access, like for example, if you want to gain access to SharePoint from an organization perspective, as an organization user, this access is controlled in Entra ID. If you want to access a resource, when I mean a resource could be a VM or anything. Um, so if you want to access a resource itself, the access is controlled at the ARM level by means of Azure RBAC, which is implemented through Azure IAM. Like I will explain these things through the presentation, but then I'm just giving you clarity again, like what would be the content. So in case like if you feel like uh, in between the presentation, if you have any doubts, if you are hesitant to ask, like feel free to ping a message, and I will try to, like, I will stop the presentation, and then I will try to answer the questions. We can have, as usual, we can have the question and Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Also, if in between, like while I'm talking on a particular slide, and if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me and ask those questions. Or you can message. I think if you drop your messages in the chat also, I will stop the presentation and answer your questions. Otherwise, bro, that can be done, right? Like message
Yes,
normally
bro,
like
yes, bro. நான் கூட உங்களுக்கு எனக்கு ஏதாவது மெசேஜ் வந்தால் சொல்றேன்.
ஓகே. அனிருத் ப்ரோ, உங்க வாய்ஸ் எனக்கு சரியா கிளியரா கேட்கல. ஏன்னு தெரியல. அரவலி ஒரு ப்ரோ அவரோட இதுதான் கிளியரா கேட்குது. சொல்லிடுறேன். ஓகே.
அப்படியா?
இப்போ
வெயிட்
பெட்டர்
வெயிட்
தெரியுதா
வெயிட்.
உங்களுக்கு?
ஓகே. தெரியும்.
தெரியும்.
ஓகே ப்ரோ. ஓகே. Fine. Like yeah. Like let's start with the Azure tenant hierarchy. So like we'll start with tenant. Like tenant, like in very simple terms, right? Like, it represents a single organization. Most of the time a single organization, say for example Meta, would have a single tenant only. But if they have acquired multiple companies, like they have acquired WhatsApp, or they have acquired Instagram. These individual organizations might have their own tenants that they deploy their own resources. So like in very simple terms, for understanding purpose, this is more like an AWS organization, and tenant represents a single organization. For example, a company like Meta or Coca-Cola. As I mentioned, the company can have multiple tenants through acquisition, and in those scenarios, they will be doing synchronization of user accounts as well as resources across multiple tenants actually. So this is the content, and like I will come to the like about the management group, subscription resource group. I will explain, but before that, I will explain what is the resource. As I mentioned, right, a resource is an actual service like which is being offered by Azure. This could be in the form of a VM virtual machine where we can deploy our application, or app services, or app Azure functions like AWS Lambda. Um, or storage accounts like AWS S3 buckets, or key vaults like AWS Secrets Manager, where we can store our sensitive data. So our resource represents a single service actually, like as mentioned here.
ஏன் ப்ரோ
Resource
சாரி டு
group.
இன்டரப்ட்.
Yeah.
அப்புறம் சாரி டு இன்டரப்ட். நீங்க இது கொஞ்சம் ஃபுல் ஸ்க்ரீன் பண்ண முடியுமா?
புரியல.
ஃபுல் ஸ்க்ரீன் பண்ண முடியுமா ப்ரோ? பிரசன்டேஷன் மோடுக்கு போக முடியுமா? எங்களுக்கு வந்து சைடில் இந்த ஸ்லைட் டெக் இது எல்லாமே தெரியுது. அதான் அதான்
சைட் ஷோக்கு போக சொல்றீங்களா?
ஸ்லைட் ஷோ தான், ஸ்லைட் ஷோ தான். சூப்பர் நைஸ். எஸ்.
ஓகேவா?
ஓகே.
Okay. Coming to the resource group, say for example, a particular application, right, has multiple microservices, and you want, so say for example, microservice one has is deployed in that particular microservice, right, is deployed within a VM, and that particular VM has some dependency with the database or with the storage account, like that. So this particular microservice one, we are using for example, we are using three different resources. One is a virtual machine, and the virtual machine talks to the database, and it also has a dependency with the storage account. So these three resources we can group together and we can create a resource group and assign these three only these particular resources under that particular resource group. Okay, so efficiently we can manage these particular resources associated with a particular microservice. Say for example, that particular microservice has been deprecated, and we don't need those particular resources which were hosting that particular microservice one. Then we can go. We don't have to go to that particular resource individually and then delete or make modification. We can come to the resource group associated with microservice one and delete that particular resource group, and all the resources that are assigned grouped together under that particular resource group gets deleted. So this is just to manage that resource group, like the resources. The concept of resource group is just to manage the resources associated, which are like closely related to each other, and which can be a microservice or which can be an application. So, but for microservice one, we can create one resource group. For microservice, there is another microservice which handles a different functionality. We can create a different resource group, which will have only, say, for example, app services and keyboard. This is just a logical abstraction to manage the resources in a better way and modify those resources as well. Coming to the subscription part, um, say for example, if a particular application team, right, they would have multiple environments. For example, production, pre-prod, dev, stage, like that. So for each of these environments, they can create, if they want, they can create multiple subscriptions within the same tenant. They can create multiple subscriptions. One subscription will have only all the production workloads running. The another subscription will have only the pre-prod workloads running. So this is again to manage, to create a partition, logical partition, and to manage the resources in a better way actually. That is the concept behind subscription. Management group. This can be like compared to AWS service control policies, SCP, where we can like enforce some policies across the entire organization. Okay. For example, through management group, I have thousands of subscriptions inside my tenant. I want to enforce a particular policy to all the thousands of subscriptions. Then management groups comes into the picture. For example, I want to enforce a policy saying the any VM. If at all anyone is creating any VM, right, they should not create the VM in a particular region. Like say for example, they should not create a VM in a US East to like that US East region like that. So if you want to enforce the condition across the thousands of subscriptions, we can create a policy here and enforce that policy across the subscription. So if at all anyone tries to create that VM in a particular region, they won't be able to do it. As I mentioned, this is like very similar to like service control policies, where we can restrict some resource creation and other things across the organization. This is the flow. As I mentioned, the tenant, management groups, subscription, we can have multiple subscriptions. Under subscription, we can have multiple resources group, where we group together related resources so that we can manage them efficiently. And resource itself, it could be a database, storage account, anything. Okay, coming to this part, Azure has like three distinct services actually. As you can see, the Entra ID part, ARM, and Microsoft 365. A directory is like a directory, to be like very frank, a directory is something like that holds users, application, roles, devices, and many other components. Entra ID is specifically used for authenticating and authorizing users, applications, and other identity objects who try to access Azure itself, and then if they want to use some SaaS services offered as part of Microsoft 365 suite, right? That authentication and authorization is also controlled by Entra ID. Okay. To give a very simple example, right? Say we have an application and it wants to talk to Exchange, or you want to upload a file to OneDrive or SharePoint. Those API permissions to access OneDrive or SharePoint or Exchange are created within Entra ID. Here, this part. When an application needs to send emails or access files in OneDrive, these API permissions would be assigned in Entra ID. So we go to Entra ID, there would be an app registration part. We create an application. We create a client ID and secret for that application. We create API permissions, like what are the intended permissions that this application needs. say this application needs to upload files to OneDrive, or this application needs to send some automated mails. We go give those specific permission, API permissions in that Entra ID. So whatever permissions that are assigned to that application, right? The application will be able to do those only. If, for example, if we give permission only to OneDrive, it won't be able to access SharePoint. Okay. So this is controlled in Entra ID as well as application itself. I mentioned, right? They are for an application, we will be creating a client ID and secret. So the authentication itself and the authentication to the Azure portal itself and the authenticating to Microsoft 365 suite and accessing the Microsoft 365 suite of applications, right, is controlled by Entra ID. Okay, that is the distinction. But if at all I want to access, if at all that particular the same application, right, which we have configured to send mails or access OneDrive, if at all it wants to access a storage account, which is a resource, okay, it wants to access a storage account within Azure, or it wants to access a key vault within Azure, that is not controlled under Entra ID. This is the distinction that we need to remember actually. That is not controlled under the authentication is controlled by like the identity, the user, group, or application is managed by Entra ID. But access to the resource itself is controlled by Azure RBAC. And that is implemented through Azure IAM actually. So if at all I want to give my application, the same application, access to a storage account, I have to give it a storage account reader access or storage block data reader, like reader access or a contributor kind of access. Like if it has only reader access, it can read from that storage account, or if it has like additional permissions like contributor or some other permission, it can upload as well as delete files in that storage account. So this is controlled at the ARM level. Okay. If you, I would mention like the ARM and Microsoft 365 are linked to Entra ID. In the sense, in Azure RBAC, right, we can define which user has which role on which particular resource. On Azure RBAC, we can define which user or an application has which role on which particular resource. Like as I mentioned, right, that this particular application has storage block data reader role on this particular storage account. We can define this within ARM. So the identification part, this application is handled by Entra ID, but the access part to the resources itself, the authorization part to access the resource itself is controlled through RBAC, Azure RBAC, or the IAM. Feel free to ask questions if you have any in this part. The Azure IAM, coming to the Azure IAM part, right?
Can you repeat the same point? Entra ID and IAM related.
Which one?
Entra ID and ARM.
Okay.
So how both will closely linked to that?
Okay. In RBAC, right? In Azure RBAC, we can create a role saying this particular principal. Principal can be a user on an application. Like principal, say for example, principal is a user, money. Okay. Money has a role. What role? Storage block data reader or Cosmo DB operator. Money has this role. Okay. On a particular resource. Resource can be a storage account. Say for example, storage block data reader. Using this role, I can access a particular storage account. Okay. Or if it is a Cosmos DB operator, I can access a particular Cosmos DB database. Okay. So the money has storage block data reader role on a particular storage account. Say for example, storage account 1. Okay. Here the money, right? So ARM has to know if the request coming in is from money or a different user, right? ARM has to know whether the request coming in, who I am trying to access the storage account. But ARM has to come to know, right, that if it is money or some other user who is accessing the storage account, right? That is handled by Entra ID, that identification part. Entra ID only will give the information to ARM saying money is trying to authenticate to storage account. So that information comes from Entra ID. But after that, once the user has been identified, right, money has been identified, then ARM will check in its database whether money can access the storage account, right? Money has ARM will check whether money has the necessary role assigned on this particular storage account. ARM will check it. And then only if at all it is allowed in the RBAC role, right? If we have explicit role created, custom role created for that access, then only ARM will allow me to access that storage account. Otherwise, I won't be able to access it. Yeah, again, like if you have any questions, let me know. Like if it's
Yeah,
still
I
not
have
clear, let
still
me know.
same question. Kind of since you mentioning identity, right? Whether it mentioning the device or inside the device there is a user is a money having a MacBook. Okay, that was registered in Entra. Okay, so in the case identity information means you are mentioning the user or both device plus user.
Service principal in Azure can be user, group, security principle in Azure can be user, group, service principal, or managed identity. Here, like for this particular example, right, I was mentioning the user, not the device. I'm not coming to the Azure AD connected joined device. I'm talking about the user only. Like you forget about the device. I'm trying to access Azure portal like from a browser. I've logged into the Azure portal and then I'm trying to connect to the storage account. Okay, I have logged into the Azure portal from a browser and I'm trying to connect to the storage account. There, the identification part is determined by Entra ID, but the access control part to the storage account is controlled by ARM. Okay, I'm not talking about the device here, but to answer your question, right, the security principles in Azure can be security service principal, managed identity, user, or group.
Yeah,
It
clear.
could be all four. I'm saying.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah,
Hey, Mani, I have a question here.
yes.
With it's regards to the same Enter ID, you mentioned in the first line that Enter ID manages authentication and authorization.
Sorry,
And
sorry,
for
sorry.
ARM,
Sorry. Can you be a little loud? Actually, I'm not able to hear properly. It's like very feeble.
yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Is my voice audible?
Yeah, little.
Okay, I was asking that for the authorization part in
Yes.
Enter ID and in ARM, it's the access control, right? Doesn't it mean the same thing? Because authorization is like have whether the user group or application has access to the respective resource. So, what's the difference between this authorization and control access? It seems to be the same.
Yeah, I will answer the question. So if you see, I would have mentioned here the authorization you are talking about, right? Within Entra ID, that we have some roles like global administrator, global leader, or Teams Microsoft Teams administrator, or help desk administrator. Within Entra ID, we have these kind of different directory roles. Okay. Say, as a normal Azure AD user, right? I want to be able to change the attributes of other user, right? Other user, I won't be able to change the attributes of other user within Azure, like Entra ID or Azure AD. Okay. I would require some kind of permissions, the authorization you are talking about. Say, for example, if I am a help desk administrator, right? If I have this directory role assigned within Entra ID to me, then I can change the password for other non-privileged users. Like when I say like being an help desk administrator, as far as I know, I cannot change the password for global administrator, but I can change the password for any user who are not privileged, who don't have privileged roles. So only if I have that particular uh, help desk administrator role assigned to me, I can change the password for other users. So this is the identification and authorization part. Only if I have those directory roles assigned to me, I am authorized to change the password for other users. Otherwise I won't be able to make the changes. So that's why I would have mentioned authentication and authorization part at the Entra ID level, and access to Microsoft 365 suite is controlled by Entra ID. Like very simple terms. Access authentication and authorization to Azure and Microsoft 365 is controlled by Entra ID. Authorization for accessing resources is controlled through Azure RBAC. Okay, like Azure
Yeah,
Active
got
Directory
it.
is a directory. Like it's kind of a directory which holds user groups, devices, many other things, like a typical Active Directory, right? Which holds computers, OUs, different things, right? Similarly, Azure Active Directory has all this information for an organization, user, group, devices. If I'm able to change those attributes, if I'm able to make the changes to the directory itself, role, or if I'm able to add a device or anything, right? That authentication and authorization is controlled under Entra ID. Again, if I have to access Exchange, Microsoft Teams, Outlook, everything is controlled by Entra ID. But access to the actual resource, VM, like storage account, database, is controlled by our Azure Arc.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Azure IAM. Okay, this one. We were talking about it actually. Like I would say a simple difference between AWS, Azure, and GCP, right? AWS has identity-based access. Like simply, you go log into the AWS console, you go to a user, group, or a role, like the service principals in AWS. You go to a user or a group or as a role, right? You can directly list all the policies, IAM policies attached to the particular user group or role. You can directly see and confirm that this is the level of access this particular user has. This is the level of access this particular service has. You can directly confirm. Like AWS has identity-based roles, okay? But here, when it comes to Azure and GCP, right, they have resource-based access. So to identify what level of access a user money has on a particular resource, right? We have to go to the resource and then query that resource. Say that query that resource, looking for which user, as I mentioned again, I will mention this particular term, which user has which role on which resource. So I have to go to the resource and ask whether who are all the users or applications who are allowed to do a particular action on that particular resource. So this is the distinction between AWS and resource. AWS and Azure. AWS has identity-based roles, policies. Azure has resource-based policies actually. Okay. Maybe that could have been a little confusing, but to better clarify, I would say I can explain, but I don't have the image right now. But I will try to give like if I can show up RBAC policy, right, it would be more helpful to you understand like what exactly is an RBAC policy. Because I thought most of you have already known about RBAC, so I did not include an image for RBAC actually. But it controls, like for example, as I mentioned here, this is the user. Like RBAC controls users, groups, service principals, and managed identities, and it controls what they can do on a particular resource based on the roles assigned to them. Where that role can be keyboard secrets user or virtual machine contributor, for example. If they have this particular role on that particular resource, then they can do anything associated with that role on that particular resource. But like you don't have to, like I mentioned, to identify all the roles assigned to a resource, right? There are multiple command line utilities as well as PowerShell modules that we will see in the next slides actually. So you don't have to, like as I mentioned, like by explaining it, I would have mentioned we have to go to each resource and then see what RBAC policy is assigned to it. But we don't have to do it manually because that will be time consuming. We have some automated scripts like AZCLA as well as Azure, Microsoft Graph PowerShell module, which can does all the heavy lifting for us and return whatever the information that we need. We will come to that RBAC enumeration part in the next slides actually.
Yeah, Manik, will you give hello, Manik? Could you hear me? Hello.
Hello.
Could you hear me? Hello.
Sangam,
Yeah, Manik. Could you? Yeah. Okay. Could you give me an real-time scenario or kind of an example, like based on the resource-based access and identity-based access, like AWS and Azure, those difference? It will be more easy for us to understand.
I will share it because I'm not sure if I try browsing right now, right? I'm not sure if it will take some time, but I can share it once we have concluded this presentation, right? Maybe we can go to the Azure website and see like an RBAC policy for an example.
Yeah, okay. But if you include some kind of examples, means it's more likely more compatible to us to understand that one.
Okay, wait a
Yes.
minute.
And another suggestion, Mani, like for you can answer it now or you can answer it later on end of the session. What my question is like, for example, I'm an organization. I'm already having some sort of basic security measures like SOC, EDR, and kind of stuff to protect my infra. And I'm planning to like introduce like I was introduced to cloud resources recently. Let's take it like that. Like I'm using basic services like some instances or kind of SaaS or IaaS services recently. So, as an organization new to cloud, what I should primarily focusing on, like securing my resources on the AWS or Azure, any cloud-based environment. You got me right?
No, there was some disturbance. I was not able to hear properly actually.
Just. Yeah, could you hear me?
Yes,
Is my voice is clear?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, you can answer this question later on now based on your wish. But what I'm trying to know from this session is, let's take I'm an organization who's completely new to cloud services, which
Okay.
I'm already having some sort of security measures like SOC, EDR, and kind of basic stuff to secure my infra, which is a physical infra. I was recently introduced to like those cloud services, like instances or any kind of IaaS or SaaS kind of services recently. And now, what are all the basic measures, like the basic or initial measures I have to take to secure my recently like added cloud services like that? As a new to those cloud service organization, kind of a small or medium kind of organization, what measures and what are all the key areas I should protect for my like maintaining my infra as smooth as I can?
You're asking like what areas you need to secure to
Yeah, it's a beauty
what
perspective. Yeah.
you want to
What
know
can
what
I
are
do?
different attack vectors and what are the areas you need to secure. Is that
Not
correct?
exactly attack vectors as a blue team. For example, I'm asking it an organization perspective. For
Okay.
example, my client, what I'm asking is, so for example, I'm a blue team service provider, and my client is coming to me and he's asking like that, I'm recently added some instances, or I'm recently hosted my services on or applications on cloud. So what I should do to protect my services he's asking? Let's make it in that way. So what are all the recommendations I can give him? Also, like what are all the basic measures I should take to protect my environment, cloud-based environment? Do you have any
Yeah.
idea regarding it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Bro,
okay.
sorry to interrupt. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Actually, அது கூட like இதுல வந்து நம்ம ஒரு 35 செஷன்ஸ் இருக்கு. ஸோ இதுல வந்து பேசிக் ரெகனசன்ஸ் அண்ட் தென் வந்து நீங்க கேட்குற வல்னரபிலிட்டிஸ் அந்த இதெல்லாம் இருக்கு. இது முடிச்சுட்டு நம்ம இந்த லாஸ்ட் டிஸ்கஷன் பண்ணா மேபி பெட்டரா உங்களுக்கு அண்டர்ஸ்டாண்டிங்.
உங்க
இன்னொன்னு என்ன like
சொல்லலாம்.
இப்போதைக்கு நம்ம 3 ஸ்லைடு தான் தாண்டிருக்கோம். இன்னும் 38 ஸ்லைடு
ஓகே ஓகே அதான் இப்போ கூட சொல்லலாம். லாஸ்ட் டெஸ்ட்ல உங்க கம்பேட்டபிலிட்டி பட் என்ன கொஸ்டின் அப்படிங்கிற மாதிரி சொல்லுங்க. ஓகே ப்ரோ.
Okay. We will discuss further. Like I will answer your question later. Actually, we will discuss after the slide for sure. Okay. Because there are some voice disturbances. I was able to understand the question little, but not the entire context. And also on the RBAC, I have some I can see some images, but I don't think these are enough to explain the entire context. Maybe after the presentation, I can share you what exactly how a typical policy would look like. Maybe just a minute. if you see here, you're able to, all of you are able to see my screen, right?
Yes, bro. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So if you see here, like these are all built-in rules in Azure. These are all managed under ARM, not under Entra ID. That was the difference I was saying. These all these built-in rules for roles for resources, right, are handled by ARM, Azure Resource Manager. These are not handled under Entra ID. This particular, if you are talking about this particular role, right, it will allow you to read and list Azure storage containers and blobs. So if I have this particular role assigned to me for a particular storage account, say for example storage account 1, maybe I will money or app, okay, role. This is a very simple example. It is not as it is, but this is how RBAC works. Role, okay, resource, storage account 1. Say test storage account. This will be one RBAC policy. Another one we can say like custom, sorry, one. Access. Okay. Say here, this is one policy, other policy, role assignment. Okay, where it says the money a user or an application, which is a service principal. I'll come to that point, like what is a service principal or managed identity. We'll come to that point. This will determine what level of access a user or a service principal have on a particular resource. This is a particular resource, just a storage account that was custom, like that was created by a user. Okay, if money has this role on this particular storage account, then he can do whatever the permissions that are permitted under this role. Storage blob data reader, right? Basically, storage blob data reader allows you to read and list Azure storage container and blob. Okay, so if a particular principal or user has this role assigned to a resource, right, then he can do whatever the permissions that are allowed through this role. So this is a typical example of a Azure RBAC policy. This is one policy. Okay, if I have another policy, say VM contributor. Then I can do whatever the permissions that are allowed through this role, right? I can execute those actions on this particular VM. Say for example, production VM. There is a production VM, virtual machine created, and if money or a particular application has this particular role on that particular production VM, right? Then you can do whatever the actions that are permitted under this role, VM contributor role. Is that clear, or you want more examples?
It is clear, Mani. Thank you. Yeah.
Hello. Is that clear, or you want more examples for RBAC?
Yes, Mani. It is clear. Very clear. Yeah.
Clear, Mani. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Coming to the, I will start the slideshow again. Coming to the service principal part, we have an application, like quickly run through, like we will give you examples, like we will give you basic examples. We have an application on-prem. We have this application on-prem. We don't have this application deployed within an Azure environment, not the cloud environment. But with this application, right, has an upload functionality. Okay, where users will be able to upload their photos or their upload any files. Once the user upload any files, right, this application has to take those files and then save it within Azure OneDrive or SharePoint or within Azure storage account. Okay. So what we do, right? Say this application, as I mentioned, the context is this application is within an on-prem environment, but from within an on-prem environment, it has to talk to Azure. Okay. Then in that scenario, we will be using service principles. We will go to Azure Entra ID. There we would have an app registration form actually, where we can create an application. We can create an application and then create client ID, secret, or certificate for that particular application. Okay. And this particular client ID and secret we can use within our application. The application that is hosted on-prem, right? This particular client ID and secret we can use it within our on-prem application to talk to Azure. And once while we are creating the application, right, there will be an option. So here if you see, this is a test application called Dart Graph API. Okay, we are creating this application within Entra ID. Okay, once we have created this application, we have to give it some API permission. As you can see here, right, API permission, we have to add a permission. As I mentioned, this particular application, once a user uploads a photo or a file, it has to talk to OneDrive or SharePoint and save the file to OneDrive or SharePoint. Then we have to add a permission and create that particular permission or give the particular permission here, define the particular permission here. For example, for this particular application, that Graph API, they have given certain permissions like audit log, read all, directory read all, user read. So this particular application can only do these three different actions. It can read the details for all, read the attributes for all users. It can read the entire Active Directory, like the user groups for the tenant, right? You can read all the user groups, applications in that particular tenant. But for this particular application that I am talking about, the test application, if at all it wants to upload a file to OneDrive or SharePoint, right, we have to add the permission here. Under the Microsoft Graph, we have to define the permission saying mail, like for example, OneDrive, for example, OneDrive.upload. This is not exactly correct, but for understanding, I'm saying OneDrive.upload or site.add, site.upload, like that. We have to define the permission here, and we have to create the certificates and secrets for authentication. Then we have to use the client ID with secret or client ID with certificate in our custom application hosted on-prem, so that it can talk to Azure and do the upload process. So this is where service principle comes into the picture. So we have an external application and it wants to authenticate to Azure. We use service principle. With custom permission, API permissions, we have to explicitly specify the permissions needed for the functionality to work. Service principle, as I mentioned, this is like we'll talk about managed identity and then explain the difference between managed identity. Service principle, as we are creating explicit client ID and secret, we are creating some kind of username password for authentication. But managed identity is different. So if at all we are creating a client ID and secret, we have to make sure we have to secure it. We have to keep it in a vault or a database encrypted. We have to make sure that the credentials are not leaked in GitHub or any externally by any means, right? We want an application to authenticate, but we don't want to make use of any client ID or secret. Then we can use managed identity. The main purpose is, right, we don't have to create any kind of credentials like client ID or secret, but we can allow an Azure resource to talk to another Azure resource. For example, we have the same application. We have an application hosted within Azure. Managed identity comes into the picture only if you are using resources only within Azure. But if you are using resources, like if you want an application out of Azure, which is hosted outside of Azure, to talk to Azure, we can use service principle. But if you want to, if you want to use an resource, if you want an Azure resource to talk to another Azure resource within an Azure environment, then we use managed identity. For example, we have an Azure application hosted within Azure App Services. We have an application hosted within Azure App Services. And this particular application has to talk to a backend database. Or this particular application has to talk to a backend Azure key vault. Okay, so the application itself is hosted in Azure, and the keyboard is also present in Azure. So all the components are present only in Azure. Okay, then we don't have to explicitly create client ID and secret for the application to talk to keyboard. We can just create a logical identity, kind of a logical identity for that particular resource. We can go to the resource and create a managed identity. Like there will be an option called create managed identity. We don't have to create any kind of client ID, secret, or certificate. Once we create the managed identity, this particular application will have a unique identifier, a kind of a token. It will have a unique identifier to identify that particular application. Then we can go to Azure IAM and we can say, I will give you an example. Here I will mention, right? Here, money or app I will mention, right? This app could be service principal. Or managed identity. And this service principal or manager, we have to define the role. What, like if at all it has to access a keyboard, right? This application has to access a keyboard, right? We have to give it a role. Keyboard reader. Production keyboard, for example, production keyboard. Okay. So if we have allowed, assign this role to the managed identity or the service principal, right? Then the particular application can talk to the keyboard and retrieve secrets from it, or anything. You can do anything with the keyboard actually. Only if we have this RBAC policy created explicitly for the service principal or managed identity, right? Then the application can talk to the backend database or can talk to the backend storage account or keyboard. Okay. And the only difference between service principal or managed identity, right? Service principal is hosted outside of Azure, and we have to create client ID and secret and manage those credentials safely. If at all it gets leaked, anyone can access the Azure resources. But for managed identity, it is very similar to service principal, but it is hosted within Azure, and we don't have to maintain any kind of credentials. Azure itself does the heavy job of doing all the credential management for us. We don't even know what client ID or secret, whatever token that it is using, right? We don't even know. We cannot see it. We can just it does the authentication backend. Azure itself manages the authentication in the backend. Once we have created this RBAC policy, a managed identity will be able to access the whatever resource that we have allowed in RBAC policy, right? Managed identity will be able to access it.
Mani, I got a question. For the service principal, you have written that credentials must be manually created by a user.
Yes.
So is it something that it could be any user or some privileged user can only do so?
Most of the time we can create an application and then it doesn't have to be privileged actually. It doesn't have to be privileged. As a user have access to a subscription and I want to create I want to create an application within Azure, right? I think it is controlled by setting in enter ID whether any user can create application. I can answer the question later. I think it is controlled in enter ID. It is kind of a setting like whether any user can create applications like that. But I think it is not like a privileged kind of functionality. But most of the time I've seen, right, many organizations, they have any user can create an application and create the client ID and secret for that application.
So by application, what exactly do you mean? Like a web application or what?
Application in the sense I would mention, right? It is not a real like a full-fledged web app. It is kind of a what I can say. You want some kind of automation to be done, okay? And so you create a kind of an application in Enter ID. It is not like a full-fledged web app based on PHP or Java or something. Not like that. You create some kind of an you can for easy understanding, right? You can take this some kind of an automation account or something. You create some application in Enter ID, and you can create client ID and secret for the automation account. and you can use it within your application, like or a Python script. Once you created a client ID and secret for that application, right? You can use it within your application, the actual web application or a mobile application or a Python script for automation, right? You can use it to authenticate to Azure and do some kind of automation. That is the purpose of service principal actually.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
And regarding the
And
configured by the
one
user
more,
part,
one,
yeah,
one more
sorry.
thing I want to clarify. As far as I have seen, the most users can create service principal, but I cannot go say, for example, another user has created service principal, an application. Okay, I cannot go and create client ID and secret for that application unless or until I am the owner for that service principal. Got it right? Unless
Yeah,
or
that
until I am the owner for that service principal, I cannot go and create the client ID and secret for that service principal.
Hmm. But as the same user, I can change it, the client ID and secret. Is it?
No,
Can it
no,
be
no.
overridden by the
Only
same
for
user?
the things. If I create my own application. Okay, I create my own application. That's what I'm saying. It is not like a privileged functionality. I can create my own application and I can create the client ID and secret for that application. But the user too, another user has created an application, service principal. Okay, I cannot go there and then create a client ID and secret for that service principal because I
Yeah,
am not
that
the
one I
owner.
got it. Yeah, that one I
I am.
got it. My question was pertaining to, can the same owner of the application override it, as in can override the client ID and secret if you want to change it?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It's more like generating an API key. Once you last it, you generate another
Yeah.
API key, then use it.
Is it similar to like other SSO based authentication where it is run, like Okta and others? I'm guessing that's what
This
you're
is
meaning,
more
right?
like OAuth identity based
Yeah.
authentication, where you use client, like you would have seen in application or API testing. Most of the time, in
Yeah.
application or API testing, you give a client ID and secret and it gives that an access token, JWT token, and then you use the JWT token to again authenticate to the resource to do whatever you want, right? It is similar to that.
Got it. And does it also follow like all the OAuth based things like uh, like it has all those different uh, I'm not able to recall all those things, but like OAuth has different portions where let's say password based credentials, some flows. Those flows are
No,
also there in
no,
this.
only two things: client ID secret or certificate. I would mention secret or certificate.
So does that also follow along the back channel, or does it have like front channel and back channel both, where it
I don't know
flows?
the difference. I don't know the difference. As I said, it would be used for automation purposes in the backend actually. From an application perspective, or even from authenticated outside of for authenticating outside of Azure.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot.
If you have any doubts in the difference between service principal and managed identity, feel free to ask. I don't want. I suppose I confused you in the other part, but I don't want to confuse you in service principal and managed identity part. If you have any questions, please let me know. Okay. Okay. Enterprise application, nothing, not a big deal. Like I would have mentioned, just for understanding purpose, like we have the applications as service principal or managed identity. Enterprise application, like if an organization wants to use Zoom, ServiceNow, that access is also controlled through Entra ID. They can allow it, and the users, right, under the particular organization, they can access this SAP, Workday, or Zoom using Entra ID SSO. They don't have to create separate user credentials for logging into this application. Everything is managed by Entra ID. Just for understanding purpose, it is not like just for explanation I have put there. Okay. So, like for the pen testing or for managing the Azure resources, right? You will be using this only Azure CLI, a Azure PowerShell module. For managing, as I mentioned, for management purpose, like if you want to create a resource or modify a resource, delete a resource, as well as for doing pen testing, also we will be using these tools only. Azure CLI, like AWS CLI, Azure PowerShell module, A is a PowerShell module. Azure AD PowerShell module now it is deprecated, and right now we have to use only Microsoft Graph to talk to both. Like we have to use Microsoft Graph PowerShell module. We can talk to both Entra ID as well as Microsoft 365 suite of applications. Like if you want to talk to OneDrive, Exchange, if you want to upload a file, read a mail, or if you want to manage users in Entra ID, that has to be done by Microsoft Graph PowerShell module. I think recently there is a Graph CLI as well, apart from Azure CLI. Okay, coming to the enumeration part, like we'll see this idea, so this might we'll come to the enumeration part, and then we'll go to the initial access part, and then the post exploitation part. Just to quickly run you through, like Azure has some public APIs, like many public APIs, which will allow us to enumerate or obtain some information about the particular company, organization, tenant information. For example, these are public APIs. These are not like sensitive data. These are public APIs which are offered by Azure itself. Okay, and these will allow us to obtain some particular information about the Azure tenant, an organization which comes under Azure tenant. Okay, for example, first of all we have to identify if you take an organization like Meta, we have to identify whether they are using Azure AD for authentication, or they are using an external identity provider like Okta or on-prem AD using ADFS, or they are using Workspace ONE for authentication. Like they could be using any other identity provider apart from Azure AD. Right? They don't have to create the same set of user credentials in Azure AD. For authentication, if at all they are using any existing identity provider like Okta, they can use federated login to log into the Azure portal itself. Okay, so these are the different login types. One is the managed identity login, which is handled username and password verification is done by Azure AD. The second workflow is through federated login, where we use the external identity provider like Okta or on-prem AD through SAML or ADFS-based authentication. The third one is Microsoft account. This is for individual purpose, for individual projects and all. So we don't want to discuss it now. Most of the organizations will use either Azure AD for will be using managed Azure AD for authentication, or they will be using an external identity portal provider for logging into Azure itself. For example, if we hit this particular endpoint, right, with the username and domain variable, parameter. For example, this is a public API. Again, I'm saying I want to clarify one point. This is not like some sensitive data, but this will be helpful for us to understand the organization that we are targeting, and it will help us to get some information that can be used for further enumeration or further attacks. For example, if we hit this particular endpoint and we have to modify this login parameter with the organization email ID, some valid organization email ID. Okay, and it will tell us what kind of login they are using to Azure, login they are using to connect to Azure. For example, if you see in the namespace field, we can see the value as federated. Basically, Microsoft, right? They are using ADFS for authentication. I suppose on-prem AD for authentication. They are not using Azure AD for authentication. So if at all you are connecting to Azure portal and trying to log in, the actual verification of username and password is happening on on-prem AD. That's why you are seeing federated as a value here in the namespace parameter. Sorry, field, namespace field. Okay. So here if you see, they are using ADFS authentication, not the Azure AD authentication. Okay. But for a different organization, say for example, if you are targeting Meta, here again some value in the login parameter, I change the value as test@meta.com. If you see the namespace value, it is managed. So here Meta is using Azure AD for authentication. This is the difference. In the previous example, you have seen Microsoft is using on-prem ADFS authentication. Meta is using Azure AD for authentication. So this is just to identify the login type that a particular organization is using. Again, there is another public endpoint. This one. This will help us to identify the tenant ID. As I mentioned, like each organization that wants to use Azure, they will have a unique tenant ID assigned to them. Once we hit this public API endpoint and then change the domain name right here, we see I will mention meta.com. It gives back the tenant ID here. This is not like a sensitive information, but just for enumeration to be used for further enumeration. Okay, we will get the actual tenant ID of Meta in the issuer field. Okay. Okay, again, let me quickly run through it. So we would have done this like we can manually hit these API endpoints and identify what kind of login they are using, a particular organization that we are targeting is using, or we can use this tools, AID internal tools to obtain the information. In the backend, this AID login information and AID internal tenant ID, right? This is going to use these APIs only in the backend to retrieve the information that we require. So instead of manually hitting the API and changing the parameters, we can use this PowerShell modules along with the organization domain name that we want to target. It will give us the tenant ID as well as whether it will tell us whether they are using federated login or Azure ID for login. Okay. Again, this particular AI internal set of tools, right? It has multiple tools, scripts that is not only used for enumeration, we can use for making changes to Azure as well as dump. Like if at all they are using enter ID connect for on-prem to Azure synchronization, right? We can dump the credentials and then do the lateral movement from on-prem to cloud as well as from cloud to on-prem. So AI internal is a bunch of scripts. I think multiple scripts just to from the enumeration part to the attack part actually. So you can refer that repo to go through each script and use it in real-time Pentest. Okay. The third one, AI internet tenant domain. This is just to identify all the registered domains associated with the tenant actually. If you specify the organization name like meta.com, it will let us know all the domains associated with the tenant using the again. And this also uses a auto discover API in the backend to retrieve the relevant information. These are all public information, not like very sensitive. Again, this one, this additional to, in addition to the this tenant domain information, right? This is also identify this script invoke a in recognize I would say that, right? It will enumerate all the tenant domains as well as the record types like MX, text records or anything, right? It will let us know like all the additional DNS records associated with the tenant. The other script. If you want to enumerate users, valid users have in that particular organization, right? We are targeting a particular organization, and if you want to enumerate a valid user, right, we can use this particular script. This particular script uses two different APIs: get credential type API and auto logon API. If you are using the auto logon method to enumerate users, right, it doesn't get logged in the sign-in logs, right? It doesn't get logged. So this is like slightly deceptive, and we can use it for password training as well as brute force attacks. If you are using the auto logon method, so it will tell us whether a particular user is present in the Azure AD or not. These are all used for enumeration. Again, I will quickly run through this. These are all used. These particular steps offered by NetSpy are used to enumerate all the domains. Domains associated with a particular tenant. Azure has this naming schema called, like, for example, azurewebsites.com, on Microsoft.com, blob.core.windows.net, again app services.azure.com, like that. Azure has this naming convention. So what these scripts does, right? It will, if you give a file, right, like permutation file, if you give a file, and if you give an organization name like NetSpy or Meta, it will try to it will try to add some common terms like production, test, dev, pre-prod, like that, to the domain name, and it will try to identify all such domains identified with associated with a particular tenant. This is more like a brute force method where it does DNS restoration. It will take all the domains as I mentioned, right, on Microsoft.com, blog.core.windows.net, table.core.windows.net, file.core.windows.net. So Azure has these naming conventions. So it will take all these domains, prepend it with an organization like Meta, NetSpy, and it will add all these different permutations and combinations using like different words like test, storage, dev, production, like that, and it will try to identify valid Azure services consumed by the organization. This is like more like a brute force where they does DNS resolution at the backend, and if at all the domain name refers to an IP, right, it could have false positives. It could have false positive, but if they do DNS resolution in the backend and that valid, if that particular domain is resolving, right, we can most probably go and check if that particular domain is associated with the tenant or not, and then start attacking that particular website. This will help us to identify different Azure services like app services, Azure functions, storage accounts that are exposed. Most of the time, sometimes if the storage account has anonymous access allowed, right, this will allow us to find those storage accounts and access those storage accounts. Just a quick enumeration script. Okay, going to the initial access part. Managed identity, I would have mentioned earlier also. Just a quick recap. We have the application hosted in Azure, and the application wants to talk to a backend Azure resource, like a key vault. Then we create a managed identity, which is like a unique identifier for that particular application. And we allow that managed identity to access key vault using Azure App. So these two, this is under the condition. We have created a managed identity for an application, and we have allowed that application to access key vault in Azure IAM. So this is the context. Then we don't have to create any kind of username password. We don't have to manage any kind of client area secret. Azure itself manages the authentication, and Azure will allow the application to talk to the backend key vault. That is the identity. That is the idea behind managed identity. Okay. So in the backend, right? If you see the 3 points at the bottom of the slide, the application uses a secret token, which we won't be able to see. We don't manage that secret token. Okay. That secret token is managed only explicitly by Azure. We don't get to see it, like we can retrieve it, but it is not managed by Azure. It is not managed by us. It is entirely managed by Azure. Okay. The application will use the secret token, managed identity secret token, to talk to the instant metadata service. This instant metadata service you would have seen in multiple in AWS also. Like the SSR vulnerabilities, they are very common. Like when we have there are many write-ups on this. When we have an SSR vulnerability in an application hosted within AWS, we need the instant metadata service to retrieve temporary credentials, and based on the access granted to the EC2 instance, for example, based on the access granted to the EC2 instance, we can do the lateral movement from the EC2 instance to other compromising other resources. Okay. So we read multiple write-ups on how we can change vulnerability, how we can use an SSR vulnerability to talk to the instant metadata service, retrieve the temporary role credentials, and do the lateral movement. Similarly, Azure also has the instant metadata service. And as most of you would have known, to fix this SSR related issues in Azure, they would have used IMDS version 2, where they would have introduced another header like metadata true. If you can pass this request header in the request, we can talk to the instant metadata service and then retrieve the credentials to talk to Azure. AWS. Similarly, very similarly, it is exactly the same actually. So we use the secret token to talk to instant metadata service, and the instant metadata service validates the secret token, okay, offered by the managed identity. If it is a valid secret token, it will return an access token, and we can use this access token, which is like a JWT token. We can use the application. The application uses this JWT token in turn to access the key vault, the storage, or SQL, whatever we have defined in our back. That is right. The application, we have created a managed identity for an application. The application has to talk to the instant metadata service to request for access token. But the application has to prove it is a valid managed identity. So internally, application will send the managed identity secret token to IMDS. IMDS validates the managed identity secret token, and it will also return the access token provided that the application has access to the key vault. And in turn, the application uses the access token to access the key vault. This is how it is managed internally. We don't control the credentials here. The secret control token, right? We don't control it. It is managed entirely by Azure in the backend. Okay. But if you have a vulnerability, like command execution vulnerability, either through SSCA or other means, if you have a command execution vulnerability on an application hosted within application services or hosted within Azure App Services or Azure Function, Azure App Services or Azure Functions, we can talk to the metadata endpoint using these variables. We can use this particular URL schema we can use this header X identity header with the variable identity header. We don't know the value of the identity header. Azure itself will load it is basically it's an environmental variable. Azure itself will load the environmental variable once the application service is created. Once we call this particular parameter, Azure will replace it with the actual value of the secret token, and it will send a request to the instant metadata service. Okay. And if you see again, like you have seen in AWS IMDS version 2, we have to include another header called metadata 2. Like this was initially used to prevent SSR chaining SSR vulnerabilities actually. So in this scenario, if we have a command execution vulnerability, we can query the instant metadata service along with the identity header, which is like a secret, to talk to the identity endpoint along with the metadata header, and we can retrieve the access token. Okay. Here if you see the resource parameter, right? Here I would have mentioned management.azure.com. Here we are trying to retrieve an access token for ARM, Azure ARM. If it is management.azure.com, it is Azure ARM. If you want an access token for talking to Microsoft Graph, right, we have to replace the resource variable with graph.microsoft.com. If you see resource is equal to management.azure.com, we have to replace it with graph.microsoft.com. So, like if we have the necessary permissions, right, if that particular managed identity as the necessary permission, then we will get a access token to talk to Microsoft Graph. Or if you want to talk to Vault, key Vault, we have to replace the resource parameter with vault.azure.net. Again, if the managed identity has the necessary permissions to talk to key Vault, we will get a key Vault access token. Also, we can get an access token for storage. Once we get an access token, we can use any tool like you have seen, right? Microsoft Graph PowerShell module, or AD PowerShell module, or AZ PowerShell module. We can use that access token to authenticate using this PowerShell module and talk to the corresponding services, whether it's a Key Vault, whether it's Microsoft Graph, or whether it's Azure ARM. So this is the idea behind it. Any questions here? Any doubts here? Any clarity needed here?
So far good நினைக்கிறேன் bro. Thumbs up la வருது.
Okay, fine. One more thing I wanted to say, right? We have to include the identity header only if the application is hosted within a Azure App Services or Azure function. Here, this context, right? This application is hosted within Azure App Services or Azure function. But if the application is hosted within an Azure VM, right? We don't have to include the identity header in our request. We don't have to. We just have to include the metadata header in our request. Then Azure, in the backend, Azure will automatically retrieve the access token and will give it to us actually. Only under the context, if the application is running within App Services or Azure function, we have to use this header, X identity header. Otherwise, it is not required. Very similar to AWS. Quickly, like this is self-explanatory. Like we are going to use these scripts for password training attacks against MS Online accounts as well as Outlook Web Access, Outlook Web App, or Exchange Web Services actually. That's password training attacks using these scripts. Storage accounts. I will explain what is a shared access signature. These are similar to AWS pre-signed URLs. What we can do, right? We can go to a storage account. We can create a shared access signature, which is kind of a token, and we can say whoever has this token, right? They can only read the storage bucket, or they can only upload to the storage account, or they can only delete a file from the storage account. So we can limit the permissions. Okay, we can create a shared access signature, but we can limit the permissions. Only read, only upload, only delete, like that. And we can also define how long this shared access signature token is valid. Okay. I'm not sure about the default time, but we can restrict it to like 1 or 2 hours. Only for 1 or 2 hours, that particular shared access signature would be valid. Very similar to AWS pre-signed URLs. Yeah, so if at all an application wants to access S3 bucket in AWS, right? If an application wants to access the AWS bucket, most of the time we will create access key ID and key token, which are like the permanent credentials, right? Not like assuming a role and creating temporary credentials. If you have the key ID and key token, these are like permanent credentials. Okay, if these permanent credentials, much like client ID and secret, gets leaked anywhere, anyone with can access the S3 bucket. So this is not the preferred way of accessing an S3 bucket. So in those scenarios, they will create a pre-signed URL or this shared access signature that will have limited permissions, and this shared access signature is only valid for a particular time. Like say for example 1 or 2 hours. It will be in this format, like maybe that I have shown, right? It will be in the format. But if this shared access signature is leaked in some configuration files, if it is leaked in GitHub repos, or if it is leaked in some Microsoft Teams or a Slack channel, right? Then we can retrieve it and we can access the storage account. Under the assumed compromise approach, say we have a shared access signature where we have, which allows us to access to a particular storage account. Say we are able to read or upload anything, or a particular storage account as anonymous access on the container enabled. Then we can read sensitive files, blobs from the containers. We can look for credentials. We can look for any kind of username, password, or client ID and secret that will allow us to escalate our privileges, or we can do anything we want. This is just another assumed compromise approach. Provided we have some kind of anonymous access to storage account, or we have a shared access signature that is leaked in GitHub repository, public GitHub repository, and we get that access signature, what we can do with it. Okay. Illicit consent granted attack. Okay. We would have seen, like I would have explained, we go to Azure, we create an application. Okay. We create an application and we create a client ID and secret. Here we see the certificates and secret column. We can go to certificates and secret. We can create a client ID and secret or certificate for the application. Okay. And then we can define the API permissions. Like what this particular application, this is service principal, like a service principal and application. I would say they can be used interchangeably. Okay. We can use the term application or service principal. That's for understanding I'm saying of the application, but it is exactly this particular application, right? It's a service principal. Okay. And we define the permission, like what this particular application can do in with respect to enter ID. Like in this scenario, it can read a user information or it can do read directly read out. But if you see this particular application, this is another example. If you see Contest test app, okay, this is another service principal created in enter ID. But if you see this particular service principal has extended permissions. If you see this has read and write your files. Basically, it can read all your user files and write to the files. Basically, upload some files. It can read your calendar data in Outlook or Exchange. It can sign you in and read your profile. It can read your profile. So this is much similar to Android. In Android, you give the permissions, right? If you want to access camera, you give the permission, access camera permission, or if you want to access microphone, you give the particular permission. Similarly, in Azure Enter ID, we create a service principal, assign permissions to connect to OneDrive, or connect to SharePoint, or read a mail. We can define this permission. Okay. Only difference would be in API permissions, right? There are two different types. One is application permission. If you see the type, under the type, there is application permission and delegated permission. Okay. Application permission, like what this application will do. Straightforward. Like what are the permission that this application can do. Delegated permissions, when it comes to delegated API permission, this application can impersonate another user and do actions on behalf of another user. So application permission, whatever action is being done, right, will be done by the application itself. But delegated, right, delegation, the application will impersonate an actual user provided the user has approved it. Okay, provided user has approved it. Like in Android, you will see like if the application will ask us whether the application will say, I want to have access to camera, I want to have access to microphone. We will provide the consent, right? We will provide the approval, right? Similarly, if the user provides the approval or the consent, then this application, that graph API, can impersonate a user and access the data of the user on the user's behalf. That is the attack. That is this particular illicit consent grant attack. So this particular consent, most of the time, when you try to log into an application, they will have some different functionality like login with an identity provider, or login with Google, login with Apple ID, login with Microsoft ID. Say for example, if you're trying to, I would have seen like I think trying to log into Pentest Academy or something. You would have an option to sign in with Google. Okay, once you choose the sign in with Google option and you enter your Google credentials and everything, once the authentication is successful, you would have seen, most of you would have seen an application like this come up, and it will say this particular website or application wants to read your email. Most of you would have seen. Read your email. If it is just read your email, that is fine, no problem. It will just fetch that information like our name and email. That is fine. Okay. But in terms, what attackers does, right? They will create an application in Enter ID. They will they will define delegated API permissions to act on behalf of a user, and they will say they will add the permissions to upload files, access OneDrive, access mails, read or send mails on behalf of the user. So they will create the permission here. Basically, they will create a malicious application and they will create malicious permissions. Okay, delegated permissions, and then after that they will send the link using this particular tool. Right now we don't have a demo of this tool, but like already we are over the time. But maybe in future if we can show a demo, we can show an actual demo. But then they will use this tool, which is offered by Pentest Academy. Once you have created a malicious application, you have to configure this particular 365 tool, stealer tool with the client ID, secret, and the redirect URL of our malicious application. Okay, and then we send the phishing link to the user. Once we send the phishing link to the user will get user will log if user believes it. Okay, user believes it, and if he logs in with using his own credentials, right? And if he consents to this permission, he will get a pop-up like this. After he is logged in, he will get a pop-up like this. Whether you want to consent this application accessing your data on your behalf. If the victim user, right, gives his consent to this application, then this application can do whatever the user can do. Basically, the application can read the username, the application can access user's OneDrive, do whatever it wants to do. So this is the idea behind this illicit consent grant attack. Any questions here?
Bro, எனக்கு ஒரு question இருக்கு.
Okay.
So what kind of link they will send along with the email? See, actually in email they want to be create a target pages and credential stuffing, or kind of I exactly want to know what kind of exact page they want to create and send to with the link in target.
Basically, they will create a redirect. Like the page will be the actual Microsoft website, okay? But the redirect, if you see in here, the redirect will be to this application actually. The 365 stealer, right? The redirect will happen. Basically, this 365 stealer will get the once the OAuth authorization is done, right? Here we see this particular step, right? Once the OAuth authorization is done, the site will be the actual Microsoft, right? But the redirection will be to the authorization code, right? After the OAuth authentication code is done, the OAuth code will come to the malicious application, the redirect URL.
Okay.
So after that, it can use the code to generate the access to this.
Okay, I am just repeating my thoughts. Just to correct me whether I am understood correctly. Okay. So suppose if I am going to send with one email, I am crafting some story. Along with that, using 365 stealer, I am creating one link. I just embed it in the email itself. So when a user click that, it automatically redirect to authentication first. Then afterwards, it will asking the pop-up kind of consent system.
Yes, correct. That is correct. Yeah. Only if the user believes it, gives the consent, then they will be able to access the access to them. Otherwise, this is like a phishing only. Like, very similar to phishing. Only if the user believes it and gives his consent, then the application will be able to impersonate the user.
It's very nice statement. Thank you.
Now, again, this one, if you see this particular screenshot, right? Most of the time in organization, the user has to give the consent to the application, right? This can be restricted in Enter ID, but many organizations doesn't do it. the user, like most, there are multiple options whether no user should give access consent to the application. User can give to consent to application only to the applications created within the same tenant or verified publishers. Basically, there are verified publishers like Pentest, many different vendors, right? Uh, Legitimate applications. So users can give consent to verified publishers or applications created within the same tenant. This is an option. User can give consent to any application. So this attack is possible in scenario one, like where the user can consent to any application from any tenant created in any tenant. Okay. Or if I already compromised the user account in a particular tenant and I create a malicious application in that compromise with the compromised user credentials in a particular tenant, and I'm sending phishing another user within the same tenant. Okay. Then also this is possible. If user is allowed to give consent to applications created within the same tenant. Okay. There is another option where user cannot give consent to this application. If at all user has to approve this, give consent to the application, right? It will go through admin workflow. User cannot give consent. If user tries to give consent, right, that request will go to admin. Admin has to manually verify whether this is a legitimate application. Who created this application? Is he a verified publisher? Admin has to verify all these things, and they have to give admin consent. Only if the admin consent is granted, then that application can be used. Otherwise, we cannot use that application. So this particular setting in Entra ID, right, most organizations doesn't do it. Even now, like many organizations have this default setting where any user can give consent to any application. And so this attack is possible. But again, Microsoft has made many changes. This would be kind of suspicious. There would be some suspicious attempts actually in the laws. This also can be controlled by conditional access policy. There are many things. This is a well-known attack that has been there for a very long time. Microsoft, what I know personally, right, that Microsoft has made many changes to restrict this attack, but still it is possible. A very similar attack is related code phishing. Like previously also it is phishing, it comes under phishing, illicit consent grant attack. This is also comes under phishing. This is happening right now. This kind of device code phishing right now. This attack is being used by multiple APTs, advanced persistent threat to compromise organization. This can be controlled by either disabling device code authentication or controlling it using conditional access policies actually. I will give a rough walkthrough of both device code authentication. In some input constrained devices. What is input constrained devices? Basically, some embedded devices like IoT or a printer that we won't be able to manually enter our username, password, or we won't be able to enter our MFA token for authentication. Use those kind of input constrained devices, right? Can use this device code authentication flow. If you see in the screenshot, AZ login use device code. If you enter this command, right, it will generate. Once you enter this command, okay, it will generate in the request. The request will go to device code Microsoft endpoint. The request once we enter this command, right, AZ login use device code. The request will go to device code. Okay, the authentication endpoint. In the request, there will be two parameters. One is the client ID and the scope. The client ID is the AZ CLI. So, like you are seeing, right, AZ CLI, AZ PowerShell, Azure AD PowerShell, Azure Graph PowerShell module. These are all different tools. Each of them have a different client ID that is used to uniquely. Microsoft uses this client ID to uniquely identify where the request is coming from, whether it is coming from AZ CLI or it is coming from Graph PowerShell module. So each of these frameworks, right, or if the request is coming from Microsoft Teams, for example, right. So each of these, right, have a unique client identification UUID that is used to identify where the request is coming from and whether this client ID is to authorize whether this client ID is supposed to make this request. Am I supposed to grant the request? So once we do the device code authentication, the request goes to device code, and within the request, right, there will be two parameters that will be sent. One is the client ID and the scope. Okay? And in the response, it will give us a device code, a unique identifier, a user code, another unique identifier, and a verification URI. Okay. So if you hit this endpoint, it will give you three values. One is the device code, user code, and verification URI. Now what I can do, right? Since I cannot log in from the IoT device, what I can do, right? I can take that verification URI. I can go to my laptop or mobile. I can enter the verification URI. I can enter the user code and do the manual login using my username, my password, or if MFA is enabled, right? I do the username, password, and MFA. Okay, I log in. Once I have logged in, so you understood, right? I am going to take the verification URI and the user code. I will access the verification URI in my browser, laptop, or and mobile phone. I will enter the user code that was that came up with the response when I hit the device code endpoint. I will enter it and I will manually log in using my username, password, and the MFA if enforced. Okay. Once I have done the authentication, right? Once the authentication is successful, this IoT device in the backend, this will keep on hitting the token endpoint in the backend. This will happen in the backend using the client ID and the device code. So once we hit the device code, right, it would have given a unique identifier for that particular IoT device, right? So using the client ID and the device code, it will keep on hitting the token endpoint until the authentication here happens successfully. So this will go on in a loop. So once the user, I have authenticated successfully using the verification URI and user code, the IoT at one point of time, the IoT device, when talking to the token endpoint, right, it will be able to log in because I have authenticated successfully in a separate device, in another device. So the device, the actual IoT device or the printer that wants to authenticate, right? Once I have authenticated, it will get the token endpoint with the client ID and the device code, and it will be able to fetch the access token and refresh token. And now using that access token and refresh token, that IoT device can talk to Microsoft Graph APIs in the backend. That's how this device code authentication happens. Any questions here? Okay. So the device code phishing, what we are going to do. So in, like what we are see from our side, right? We will hit the device code endpoint from an attacker perspective. We will hit the device code endpoint with the client ID and scope. Again, client ID is well known. Client ID is well known, well documented in Microsoft website actually. If you, there is a particular the Microsoft page where the client ID of Microsoft Teams, AZ PowerShell, Graph PowerShell, AZ CLI, everything is documented. We can retrieve the client ID. It is easy to retrieve. It is public information. Okay. So we hit the device code endpoint with the client ID and scope. Okay, and the device code endpoint will give us the device code, user code, and verification. Okay, but we are not going to log in. I am going to send the user code and verification URI in a phishing mail to the victim user. I have to I am going to convince the victim user. Again, same like list consent, right? If I am able to convince the victim user and he logs in with this user code and verification URI, this user code and verification URI. He will access that verification URI. He will enter the user code and he will use his credentials, the victim's credentials, username, password, and everything. He has logged in separately. This is happening in his machine. I don't have access to the machine. This is happening in some other region or some other country. Okay, he has logged in. Now, as an attacker, I can hit the token endpoint with the device code. I will get the access token of the user, the victim user. Provided he has logged in, he has believed my mail. Like basically, I have convinced him to log in using my verification URI and user code. He has believed my mail, and then he has logged in. Now I am able to, as an attacker, I can hit the token endpoint, and I can use the device code and client ID, like which I initially used to retrieve the access token of the victim user. Then I can use the victim user, impersonate the victim user, and do whatever I want. Any questions here?
Mani bro, the user code, right? It doesn't have any time validity.
Not sure. Maybe I will note it down. I'll let you know. Yeah. Not sure.
Because suppose if I am just type an AZ login user device code, it will generate one URL, right? But I can embed it with the parameter of what the exact request will send to the Azure, right? Afterwards, device code. So that request I can craft it and embed it in email. So I could wait for 1 or 2 days for the targeted to click, right? So,
Got it, got it. I will note it down. I'll let you know.
yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay. The token tactics here, right? Just to play with the token. Basically, using a token, we can change the client ID and the audience, intended audience. Once we get the access token, right, which is a JWT token, we can play with it. We can change the audience, intended audience, or the resource to connect to Outlook, Exchange, or Teams. We can basically play with the token, JWT token. With a single token, we can access multiple different services like Outlook, Exchange, Teams. So this token tactics script is used for that particular purpose.
Question, ಇದು vulnerable by default ಮಾಡಿ ಬರೀಲ್ಲ.
Again, this is for the phishing. I don't want to go much, like provided like we have already crossed the time. I don't want to go much deep into it. This is a man-in-the-middle framework. Like this is like a typical phishing where we try to impersonate or mimic an actual website like a Gmail login or Office 365 login or an Okta login. We send the phishing link to the user, and once like basically this will mimic an actual website in this scenario only, but this is not the actual domain. In the previous scenario and all, illicit consent grant attack and all, it is an actual Microsoft domain that the user is logging in. The victim user is logging in. But here, this is not an actual Microsoft domain that the user will be logging in. He will be logging into a clone of the website, actually. Clone of an actual Gmail site or clone of an actual Microsoft site. Okay, the user just believes the options, and then if he logs in, right, Evil Nginx will act as a man-in-the-middle proxy. It will relay all the requests to the actual website. It will capture all the information like the current, like whatever we ask it to capture, right? This is made possible using YAML files called fishlets. Fishlets are just like configuration files which we can configure. For example, I will have here, if you see, this is an example of the fishlet file. Here we can configure which domain we want to intercept, or like if at all in the request that is coming to Evil Nginx, right? A particular name has to be replaced with another name. We can configure it in the fishlet config file. We can configure it to look for specific cookie names or auth tokens, username, passwords. Basically, like whatever request that is going to come to Evil Nginx, right? We can modify it. We can retrieve relevant information that we want and make it so convincing that the user believes that he is actually talking to the actual Microsoft website or the Gmail website, but he is not talking. There is an in-between proxy. He doesn't know. Like there is a man in the middle in-between proxy that the request is going through the proxy. He's not aware of it. But using this particular configuration, we'll be able to retrieve or bypass MFA also. Even if the particular site has MFA enforced, right, we'll be able to capture the relevant cookies or session information using these config files, using Evil Nginx. Typical phishing. Sorry. Oh, sorry. மறுபடியும் ப்ரோ கண்டினியூ பண்ணிட்டா டைம் இருக்காங்களா ஆடியன்ஸ் இருக்காங்களா இல்லைன்னு தெரியல எனக்கு.
ஆக்சுவலா இது ரெக்கார்டட் தான். நம்ம வந்து இது பிறகு கூட கொடுத்துக்கலாம். கொஸ்டின் என்னன்னா, உங்களுக்கு கம்ஃபர்டபுளா இருக்கா இல்லையா? உங்களுக்கு கம்ஃபர்டபுளா இருந்தா பண்ணலாம், இல்லைன்னா நம்ம பார்ட் 2 வச்சுக்கலாம்.
ஓகே ப்ரோ, பரவாயில்ல, நான் கண்டினியூ பண்றேன், எனக்கு ப்ராப்ளம் இல்லை. சாரி. ஓகே, coming to the actual attack part. Like once we have compromised an user and we have gained access to our Azure environment, okay, and what are the first things that we will do? We will enumerate all the RBAC roles. Okay, we will see what user has which permission, which role on which particular resource. We'll check all this. We will enumerate all the roles. So this can be done using AEZ CLI, or we would have seen the tools, right? AEZ PowerShell or Graph PowerShell module. There are like I would have mentioned earlier in the conversation, Azure uses resource-based policies. So we have to go to the resource and check what level of access a user has on that particular resource. If you're going to do this manually, it won't work. It's not going to work. It is not feasible, right? So this Azure CLI as well as PowerShell modules, right? They have the certain filters like -- assignee or -- scope. We can fetch only relevant information that we want. Like say, for example, what kind of access I as an assignee and as on all resources. Okay, A is a role assignment list, and we can do some filters like give me only the roles assigned to this particular security principle, that user, manager identity, service principle, or a group, or give me only the roles assigned to that particular resource, or that, for example, a subscription or a storage account or keyword. So we can make these filters and retrieve only the roles that we want to uh, assess for lateral movement or exploitation, like privilege escalation. Okay, so we can do this with all the AZ PowerShell as well as other AZ CLI commands. Okay. So first thing is enumerate all the roles in IAM. See what kind of access we have and see what we can do with it. Whether we can access a storage account, whether we can access a key vault and read some sensitive data, whether we can log into a VM, we can execute commands on a VM. Enumerate all these roles, RBAC roles in IAM. First thing. Second one is group ownership. See if I am a owner of a group. If you see on the right side this particular screenshot, right? A is at AD signed in user list owned objects. It will list all the objects for which I am the owner. Say there is a group called Key Vault Admin User. This is an AD group created in Entra ID, and who the users who are added to this particular group, right? Key Vault admin users can access Key Vault. Okay? So we have explicitly granted the particular users through RBAC to access Key Vault. So if the user is part of that particular AD group, right, Key Vault admin users, then automatically they can go on to access Key Vault in the Azure resource. Okay, if at all the preconditions are met, right? Okay, and I happen to be the attacker happens to be a owner of that Key Vault admin group. Or say for example, I got a client ID and secret that was leaked in a GitHub repo. Okay, and this client ID and secret is the owner for a particular group, particular AD group. Then what I can do, right? I can add myself, the attacker can add myself to the group, and whatever privileges that group has, right? Then the attacker can start doing it. If for in this scenario, in this example, if the attacker has the key vault admin group permission, he can access key vault. This is one scenario. Second one, application ownership, service principle. If I am an owner for a service principle, right? One colleague would have asked this question: when I can create the client ID and secret? If I am the owner for that particular application or the service principle, right? Then I can create a client ID secret. So enumerate, like if I am an application for any existing service principle, we have to do the enumeration. Or if I am the admin for any existing service principle, then if at all we are an admin for a particular service principle, right? We can create the client ID and secret for the particular service principle, and then do that particular service principle. Whatever the API permissions are assigned to that particular service principle, right? Whether it has access to OneDrive or SharePoint, we can also do that. So look for roles, look for group membership, look for application for ownership, and see what we can do impersonating that particular group, impersonating that particular application. That is directory roles. You would have seen like in Entra ID, there are different directory roles like global admin, global reader, help desk administrator, billing administrator, cloud application administrator. There are multiple directory roles. See if we are part of any of these directory roles. As I mentioned, if we are a part of the help desk administrator group, right, or if our victim user that we compromised using phishing, right, is part of help desk administrator group, then basically we can change the password for any user using that directory role. So we have to enumerate the directory roles also, which is part of Entra ID. RBAC role is part of ARM. Directory role is part of Entra ID. App permissions, much like application ownership, right? App permissions, I have a client ID and secret that was leaked in GitHub. Enumerate what particular API permissions that particular application has on Entra ID, like mails, sending mails, OneDrive, Teams, by accessing files, anything. Okay? Enumerate the permissions assigned to the service principal. Then enumerate everything like key vault, storage account, deployment files, metadata, instance metadata. Most probably, if they are doing some automation, they might leak some credentials in instant metadata. PowerShell history, you can do everything actually. I will just on the screen, if you see, there are two screenshots. One is the deployment group. Just a word about deployment template. This is similar to AWS CloudFormation, where we want to deploy. Say, for example, if you want to deploy multiple VMs, databases, key vaults, storage accounts, um, across a subscription. Okay, you want to deploy multiple resources instead of going to each resource and creating these resources manually, like creating a VM manually, creating a storage account manually through the GUI option. We can create a deployment template. We can create a deployment template, and we can once we run this deployment template, right, all these resources get provisioned easily. Like if you want to deploy multiple VMs across a subscription, if you want to deploy multiple key vaults or storage account, we can define a template and provision them easily. This is like infrastructure as code, as I mentioned, like much similar to in AWS cloud formation. Okay, so if I have access to the deployment templates itself, what I can do, I can look for some credentials in the. Most probably, they should not store any sensitive information in the deployment template. They should store it in only in Key Vault or some other secure tool, right? But if they are storing some credentials or like sensitive information in the deployment template, if I have read access to the deployment template, fetch it and see if there is any credential embedded with the deployment template. This is one vector. And there is another thing called as dynamic group membership. Dynamic group membership, to give you an example, say there is a sales group in the company. Okay. In the enter ID, there is a group called sales group. And if there is a new sales professional joining the organization, in the user attributes, when the user joins an organization, right, you would have an Azure AD account provision. And in the user account attributes, right, they would have mentioned that this particular user belongs to the sales department. Okay? So in the user attributes in Azure AD, this particular user belongs to the sales department. So if we can define a dynamic uh, group membership, saying whoever has this particular attribute, like whoever has this department attribute as sales, will be automatically added to the sales intra ID group. Okay, got it? Like I am a new user, new employee. I joined an organization. I have an attribute in my account, Azure AD account, user attribute, saying I am part of the sales department. So this group, dynamic group membership, right? It will check who are all the users within Entra ID who have this attribute sales set to, department attribute set to sales department, and they will be automatically added to the sales group, sales AD group, if they have this particular attribute. Okay. Um, so if like we can change our attributes. Okay, if I can change, I am an AD user. If I can change another user attributes, or which is under my control, or I can change my attributes, my user attributes. Like I can change my department or title, right? Then I will get automatically added to a different AD group, and we have to enumerate the permissions assigned to. We have to look for the permissions assigned to that particular AD group. What all? Say for example, if it is a in the previous scenario, we would have mentioned keyword admin user. Okay, what are the permissions assigned to that keyword admin user group? We have to enumerate and see if we can do anything for privilege escalation. That is the idea behind this actually. Any question here?
Clear bro, thumbs up போறாங்க.
Okay, fine. Okay, like this one. The next three, right? VM run command, VM extension write command, and Azure automation account. Okay. Again, all these permissions are Azure RBAC permissions. Earlier, we would have seen VM contributor role, a role called VM contributor. Similarly, a role under a role, right? There will be multiple simple permissions like VM create, VM delete, like that. But if you are like in the previous step, I would have mentioned, right? Once you have access to an Azure environment, we have to enumerate all the permissions that we have, all the roles we have. And while during the enumeration phase, if we see this permission, like an attack, like a service principal or a user or that is under our control, has this particular permission, VM run command permission on a VM. Okay, I come across this particular permission on a VM. Okay, then I can execute commands on that particular VM. Again, for example, again going back to this money or app, I am the attacker or an application that is within my control. Okay, and I have this permission on a production VM. Okay, money has this permission or role. Okay, I'm just for understanding, I'm saying this. Okay, on a particular production VM, then I can execute commands on the production VM. Okay, so for that we have to enumerate what are all the permissions that I have. Once I've authenticated, once I've compromised an account and authenticated to Azure, I have to enumerate what are all the permissions that I have, and then I can execute commands on the production VM. So for this we can use AZ CLI, or we can use AZ PowerShell module also. Like there are multiple scripts available within that PowerShell gallery. Okay, we can use those scripts to run execute some commands on the particular VM. Say for example here, for example, we are executing a command, run command on IT VM, IT machine. Run, since we have this particular permission, this is the command actually. I mean the naming schema, actually command schema. Okay, this is the actual command we are executing. Basically we are adding an authorized key file to SSH into the ITVM. Right now we don't have access to the ITVM. We cannot SSH to it because we don't have access. I don't have the keys, but I can generate my own keys and add my public key to the authorized key files. Then I can SSH to the ITVM. I am able to run this actual command because I have this run command permission on ITVM. If I don't have this run command permission on this VM, then I won't be able to run this command. Okay, so that is determined. That's what I mentioned. That is determined by RBAC. Or similarly, like we can execute a PowerShell script, or we can run simple commands. We can execute PowerShell script. There are two methods actually, two run commands. One is action, which is like one-time action, or managed. If you want to execute a bootstrap script when a VM starts, or we want to execute a script for a period of time, like 1 hour or 2 hours. We want to execute the same script. We want to have the script running for 1 or 2 hours. We can use managed option. You see, if it's invoke AEZ run command, it is an action command. If it is set AEZ VM run command, it is a managed command. Managed is used for running bootstrap scripts, or it is used for running persistent scripts that you want to run for a longer period of time. The action command is like a one-time action where you want to execute a script and see the result, or execute a command and see the results. That's it. Again,
ப்ரோ ஒரு
I mentioned-
டவுட், சாரி ப்ரோ, ப்ரீவியஸ் ஸ்லைட்ல ஒரு டவுட். இப்போ நீங்க மேனேஜ்டு கமாண்ட் சொன்னீங்களா, இது வந்து பூட் ஆகக்குள்ள மட்டும்தான் எக்ஸிக்யூட் ஆகுமா, இல்ல எப்ப வேணாலும் நம்ம அந்த கமாண்ட் எக்ஸிக்யூட் பண்ணிக்கலாமா?
புரியல.
இல்ல ப்ரோ, இப்போ நீங்க இந்த மேனேஜ்டு டைப் ஆஃப் மேனேஜ்டு கமாண்ட் சொன்னீங்க, ஆக்ஷன் டைப் மேனேஜ்டு டைப்.
ஆமா.
இப்போ இதுல வந்து ஏஇசட் விஎம் ரன் கமாண்ட் யூஸ் பண்ணி நான் ஒரு கமாண்ட் ரன் பண்ணேன். லெட்ஸ் எக்ஸாம்பிள் ஹோம் ஆர் சம்திங் ரன் பண்றேன். இது வந்து கம்ப்யூட்டர் ஆன் ஆகுக்குள்ள மட்டும்தான் இதாகுமா, இல்ல வந்து அந்த விஎம் ஆன் ஆகுக்குள்ள மட்டும்தான் பூட்ல மட்டும்தான் ஆகுமா, இல்ல எப்ப வேணாலும் இந்த கமாண்ட் ரன் ஆகுமா?
ஆனா இருந்தா தான் இதாகும். மேனேஜ் தான் வந்து பூட்ஸ்ட்ராப் டைம்ல நம்ம டிஃபைன் பண்ணலாம். பூட்ஸ்ட்ராப் டைம்ல ஸ்டார்ட் பண்ணும்போது அந்த மாதிரி டிஃபைன் பண்ணலாம். ஆக்ஷன் வந்து ஆனா இருந்தா தான் இதாகும். மேனேஜ் வந்து நம்ம பூட்ஸ்ட்ராப் டைம்லயே அப்படி டிஃபைன் பண்ணிக்கலாம். எப்ப அது போல ஸ்டார்ட் பண்ணும்போது எனக்கு இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு என்விரான்மென்ட் செட் பண்ணுங்க, அந்த மாதிரிலாம், அந்த மாதிரி இதுக்கு வந்து மேனேஜ் கமாண்ட்ஸ் யூஸ் பண்ணுவோம்.
ஸ்டார்ட் அப் ஸ்கிரிப்ட் மாதிரி. ஓகே,
ஆமா. Next, VM extension. This is like very similar to the previous command, run command. Again, we are going to execute commands only, but instead of that particular permission, run command permission, we have another permission called extension write permission. Again, this was intended for like installing software. Like if you see the Azure platform hosts many extension covering VM configuration, monitoring. If a virtual machine requires software installation, antivirus protection, or the ability to run a script inside the VM, then we can use a VM extension. So this was for intended purpose only, but we can abuse it to execute commands. Like provided we have the permission on the particular VM, we can abuse this functionality to execute our shell script, or like reverse shell, or any C2 payload or whatever. Right? We can do malicious things. Similar to whatever like the commands also, like very similar to whatever we saw in the previous example. We can basically add a user or run a script. We can one more thing, like we can create a custom script. Like there are default extensions that are provided by Azure. Like if you see VM access extension, VM SQL Server extension, these are all default extensions provided by Azure itself. But Azure also provides us the capability to create custom extension. If you see set AEZ VM custom script extension. So in this scenario, I'm creating my own extension. I'm not modifying an existing extension. In this scenario, in the first two commands, if you see, I'm listing all the existing extension and I'm modifying that extension to execute my malicious commands. That is an existing extension. But if we also have the capability to create custom extension and we can download any malicious files from the internet and execute on the VMs. Okay. Automation account. Azure automation accounts are used for like managing multiple Azure services. If you want to do some routine task across VMs, storage accounts or anything, right? Or some routine tasks, management tasks or anything. Either instead of logging in manually to each VM, we can use the automation account along with a runbook. Okay? Runbook would have a set of commands that needs to be executed on a range of VMs. Say if I have hundreds of VMs, instead of manually logging into each VM, and then running some automation jobs or some backup activity or any troubleshooting activity, right? I can use the Azure automation account to connect to all the instances and then run as a shell script for troubleshooting or taking backup or anything. It's up to our imagination. Azure automation account uses managed identities in the backend. So we don't have to create a client ID and secret for authenticating to Azure resources, other Azure resources. Azure automatically manages the authentication between the automation account and the VM. For example, using an automation account, I want to execute a run book, which could, like, for imagination, like for example, I'm saying run book, you can imagine it as a PowerShell script for understanding purpose. Okay. Azure automation account, I can execute a run book against a VM. Okay. So automation account has to authenticate through the VM, right? But this is handled entirely in the backend by Azure. We don't have to worry about it. Azure takes care of the authentication between automation account and the VM. That's where we want to run our PowerShell script. Okay, this is done through managed identities, as we have seen multiple times in the past. Service principal, we have to create the client ID in secret, and we have to manage it. It's our responsibility to manage it. But managed identity, it is like service principal, but without the additional overhead of managing the credentials. Azure itself does the job for us. That's the idea. Now, automation account. Okay. Okay. Under assume compromise account approach. Okay. Say, for example, if you see the second point here, for example, attacker has the permission to modify publish runbook, and the automation account managed identity has a privilege role assigned to it at the subscription level. This is under assumed compromise approach. Say, for example, I have a contributor access to the I have a contributor level access to the subscription. Okay, Azure subscription for a particular subscription. I have contributor level access. Okay, then by default contributors can modify or publish runbooks. So this is a default permission that is assigned to contributors. In Azure AM, there are three primitive roles: owner, contributor, reader. If I have contributor level of access, or if I have any permission to modify published runbooks. Okay, under this scenario, this is one condition. This is one condition. I have contributor access where I can modify or publish a runbook. Condition number two, that are that automation account managed identity. Okay, so the automation account has a managed identity, right? And if someone has given the managed identity owner level of access to the subscription, again I will come to the back. Identity owner subscription, production subscription. Okay. So that manager identity has owner level of access to the production subscription. Again, this is the condition two. Condition one is like I have the permission to modify the runbook. That is condition one. The second condition is that manager identity used by the automation account has owner level of access to the production subscription. This is condition two. Then I can change the replay. Basically, if you see, I can create a run book, replace the content with our default, replace the default content with my privilege escalation PowerShell script. Within the privilege escalation PowerShell script, the particular privilege escalation script has these two parameters. One is to okay, okay. Either I can use the first command or I can use the second command. First command is using the object ID of the user. Like I am going to use my object ID, and I am going to assign myself owner permission at the subscription level, subscription/subscription ID. Either I can use the first command or I can use the second command. In the first command, I am using the object ID. In the second command, I am using my email address itself. Either I can use the first command or use the second command, but both are doing the same thing. Either I can use my object ID, which is a unique UU identifier, UUID, or I can use my email ID to assign myself owner permission within the particular subscription. Okay, so this is within this. This is the content of the privilege escalation PowerShell script. Okay, so I'm creating a runbook and I'm modifying, replacing the content of the default runbook with my malicious privilege escalation script, and I'm publishing it. Okay, and once that automation account, I'm not sure about when it will run, whether it will run every 12 hours or 24 hours, I'm not sure about. But when that automation account runs again, right, it will use this modified runbook. Okay, runbook. Here also I can okay. I can define which automation account I can use. For example, if you see here, I have created the runbook and I'm defining which automation account I want to use. Production automation account. I'm using this production automation account, which has owner access to the subscription. This is condition 2. This production automation account manager identity has already the owner access to the subscription level at the subscription level. Okay. Then using this automation account, I I can escalate my privileges. I have only contributor level access, but I can escalate it to owner. Okay. Now I'm publishing it. Once I run it, right, I will be automatically added to the owner group. From after the execution of the script, right, by the automation account, I will gain additional. I will escalate. I would have escalated my privileges from a contributor level to a owner level. This is for example. This is an example. Any question here?
ப்ரோ ஒரு டவுட். இப்போ வந்து இந்த ரன் புக் எல்லாம் வந்து லைக் ஒரு ஆப்ஜெக்ட் மாதிரி ஸ்டோர் ஆயிருக்குமா ஆக்டிவ் டைரக்டரியில?
ஆக்டிவ் டைரக்டரின்னு இல்ல, இது வந்து ஏஆர்எம்ல வரும்.
ஓகே, பட் இது ஒரு இடத்துல டிஃபைன் ஆயிருக்கு, சர்வர்ல டிஃபைன் ஆயிருக்கானது.
ஆமா, ஒரு ஸ்கிரிப்ட்ஸ் ஒரு இன்ஃப்ராஸ்ட்ரக்சர் ஆஸ் கோட் ஸ்கிரிப்ட்ஸ் மாதிரி யாமல் மாதிரி சொல்லலாம். அது மாதிரி.
ஓகே, புரியுது.
அந்த மாதிரி இது பண்ணி அதை நம்ம மாடிஃபை பண்ணி நம்ம அதை வந்து நம்ம டிஃபரெண்டா மலிஷியஸ் ஆக்ஷன்ஸ்க்காக யூஸ் பண்றோம்.
ஓகே, புரியுது.
This is one thing, and like if you want to run a script across multiple hundreds of machines, then we can use these commands actually. Like instead of running that script against a particular worker machine, against one particular VM, if you want to add a user to across an entire fleet of machine, we can use this actually. Different use cases. I can use it to escalate my privileges, or I can use it to execute the same command or same PowerShell script across multiple machines, or I can dump the runbook. I can dump the runbook itself and then look for much like the deployment template, right? The runbook also I can dump the runbook, download the runbook, and then see if there are any secrets, any username, password, client ID secrets that are available with the runbook. That's it. Okay, we are almost come to the end. PRT, primary refresh token actually. So we like now only we are coming to the devices. Previously, someone would have asked like devices authenticating to Azure, something like that. So I have a device like which is like a managed device or a company provided laptop, right, or a company machine, right, VM, which is connected to Azure AD. Okay, we have an Azure Entra ID joined machine or hybrid joined machine, like which is connected to both on-prem and Azure AD, right? And that synchronization is happening. Okay. And in this particular device, which is already connected to Entra ID, okay, which is connected to the Entra ID domain, I as a domain user is logging in. I'm logging into this Entra ID join machine as a domain user, with my organization account. Then automatically in the backend, a refresh token gets created. This is the primary refresh token, PRT token. This happens automatically in the backend. Okay, once I log in through using my organization username password into an Entra ID joint machine. Okay, automatically in the backend, the primary refresh token gets created. And using this primary refresh token, once I've logged into the, say for example, Windows machine, I've logged into the Windows machine. Uh, then, like within the Windows machine, I'm trying to access SharePoint. I'm opening Google Chrome browser. I'm browsing to SharePoint. I'm trying to log into SharePoint. Again, I don't have to enter my username or password. I, Azure Enter ID, right, automatically uses this primary refresh token in the backend to provide me SSO access, single sign-on access to the all the connected Entra ID resources. In this scenario, for example, like I've logged into the Windows machine, I've opened up Google Chrome browser. I'm trying to log into SharePoint. I don't have to enter my credentials again. Azure automatically uses the primary refresh tokens in the backend to log into the SharePoint using SSO. So that is the primary functionality of primary refresh tokens actually. This is done entirely in the backend. And for example, like once a user logs into the Windows machine, right, Azure uses the Cloud AP plugin for requesting refresh tokens from primary refresh tokens, PRTs from Entra ID. And then again, I'm trying to access the login to OneDrive or SharePoint within a browser in an Entra ID joined machine. The SSO happens automatically, and this happens because of a Windows Account Manager WAM plugin. Again, and Microsoft WAM plugin automatically fetches the PRT from the machine and uses the PRT to request access tokens to OneDrive or SharePoint for us to log in through SSO. This happens entirely in the backend. The This is the importance of PRT, right? If you see, the PRT is valid for 14 days, provided we continuously use the machine. Actually, in some scenarios, like if you're logging in using Android devices and all, and if you're continuously logged in, right, the PRT itself is valid for 90 days. 90 days, 90. Even then, if the PRT is about to expire, right, we can use the refresh token to retrieve, like to fetch additional access token and refresh token. So we can continuously refresh the refresh token to get additional access token and refresh token. Okay, so this can goes on forever actually. So that is the importance of PRT. And once we are able to obtain this PRT, obtaining this PRT is little bit difficult. But if at all we are able to obtain this PRT, right, then we can maintain persistent access to an environment as that particular user. We will have persistent access. Even if you lose our C2 beacon or a reversal, once we have the PRT, we can authenticate to Azure Entra ID as that user whenever we want, because it is valid for 14 days and we can refresh it whenever we want.
Bro, can an IT admin configure to have a lower expiration time?
Sorry, Kekla, sorry, I'm not able to hear properly.
இது low expiration time செட் பண்ண முடியுமா பிஆர்டிக்கு?
Hello, சரியா கேட்க மாட்டேங்குது.
இல்ல ப்ரோ, ஒரு கொஸ்டின் என்னன்னா, இந்த பிஆர்டி வந்து 14 days வேலிட்னு சொல்றீங்களா, அது
ஆமா,
வந்து கம்மி பண்ண முடியுமா அட்மினிஸ்ட்ரேட்டர் அப்படின்னு கேட்கறாரு.
அது வந்து
அதை கம்மி பண்ண முடியுமா, bring down to 10 days, 5 days?
இல்ல அதெல்லாம் பண்ண முடியாது. பட் கண்டிஷனல் ஆக்சஸ் பாலிசி மூலமா அவங்க வந்து எங்க இருந்து கனெக்ட் பண்றாங்கன்னு பார்த்து அதை பிளாக் பண்ணணும். கண்டிஷனல் ஆக்சஸ் பாலிசி மூலமா எங்க இருந்து லாகின் பண்ணுது, அந்த பிஆர்டியோட யூசேஜ் எங்க இருந்துலாம் நடக்குது, அந்த மாதிரி சீரியஸ் வச்சு அதை ரெஸ்ட்ரிக்ட் பண்ணலாமே தவிர அது கம்மி பண்ண முடியாது.
ஓகே ப்ரோ, காட் இட்.
அது ஹேண்டில் பை மைக்ரோசாஃப்ட். So there are three things. One is the access token, refresh token, and primary refresh token. Only the primary refresh token is valid for 14 days. That specifically if you're logging in into an Entra ID joined machine as an Entra ID user. Okay, suppose if you're logging into from your personal laptop, that doesn't happen. Okay, only if you're logging into an Entra ID computer, Entra ID joined machine using your Entra ID credentials, that PRT gets generated. The normal access tokens will have limited time, but this particular specific primary refresh token will have 14 days validity. And as I mentioned, what I've seen in Android, right, it is valid for in Android mobiles, right, it is valid for 90 days. Okay. Okay. Like now the thing is, Now I am in a like I have compromised the user machine. Like I have compromised under the assumption, the condition one. Okay, this is again assumed compromise, right? Under the condition, like I'm going to retrieve the PRT, but under the condition, I've compromised the entire ID joined machine. Okay, I already have a access some through some means like phishing or something. Some C2 reversal or beacon, right? I already have access to an Entra ID joined machine. Okay, as a particular user, Entra ID user. Okay, then I can use the road tools. This particular tools, set of tool set introduced by Derbjan. Basically, road tools has two different components. One is the road token exchange, token exe token exchange, and another one is the road reckon. Road reckon is used for enumeration and attack. Road token is specifically for playing with the tokens. Road token exchange is specifically for like using the PRT, requesting for PRT, then using the PRT to retrieve additional access tokens or refresh tokens. Okay, so just to play with the tokens, there are there are two tools. One is the road reckon for enumeration, and another one is the road token exchange, which is for playing with the primary refresh token. Okay, so under the assumption, if you see, I'm already in an Azure AD joined Indra AD joined device. Okay, then I can use the road token exchange. First of all, I have to initiate a request for getting a nonce. Nonce is like a unique identifier that is basically used to match the current login session with the PRT. Just a unique idea, like basically um, I have to make a request for PRT with a particular unique identifier. Okay. And then in the response, there is the PRT in the response. Once I've authenticated, right, there will be a JSON. The PRT itself is a JSON web token, which will inside it. It will have again a private refresh token inside the JWT. Right, it will have a refresh token. It will have the another key value called primary set to true, and another value called nonce. So within the primary token, there will be a value called within the primary PRT. There will be a value called nonce equal to the nonce from where we requested. Say for example, um, I have requested a PRT. So initially in the request that goes to Entra ID, right? The nonce will be a unique set of identifier. Like for example, for understanding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now the nonce value is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is sent into the request that goes to the Entra ID. Okay. And in the response, I get a PR after successful validation, like a username, password, and everything validation, authentication. I get a PRT. Within the PRT, it will have the same nonce 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For understanding, I'm saying it won't be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but I'm saying understanding. Okay. If I'm sending the PRT with a different nonce, like again I've taken the PRT and I'm sending it sending another additional request with a different nonce, it won't work because the the Azure on its side, right? It will compare the request with the PRT that was provided. It will make sure the nonce value, right, that was given in the request is the same that is mentioned in the PRT itself. It will compare both the PRT and then only it will make sure that this is a valid login. Otherwise, it will feel like the logging is coming from somewhere else, and both the login one and login two are not related to each other. So that is the idea behind nonce. So initially using road reckon, the first command that I will run is I will be doing the PRT init option. I will be using the PRT init option to generate a nonce. And once I run the first command, right, it will give me a nonce value. The first command it will give you a nonce value, and I have to take the value and use it with road token exchange. Road token. I have to take the output of the first command and use it here. Okay, all this is happening within an intra ID join device, and we have to bypass EDR and any other protect endpoint security tools actually, because most of the time road tools gets blocked by EDR. Okay, we have to bypass the EDR and all. If at all we want to run it as a part of C2 execution, execute assembly or in some any ABC way. Okay, road token in the backend, it uses a Windows executable in a Windows machine, right? It uses a browser code.exe that is part of Windows operating system. So to give an example, I mentioned Azure, right? You have logged into the Entra ID joined machine, and within it you are opening Chrome, okay, and then you are trying to access OneDrive or SharePoint, okay. The SSO happens in the backend. What Chrome does it, right? Chrome has a plugin, a Chrome extension. Okay, Chrome has a extension. Chrome cannot do SSO by itself, like especially to Azure, right? It cannot do SSO by itself. Chrome has an extension. Okay, we have to enable that extension, and that extension talks to browser code.exe. The Chrome extension talks to the browser code.exe in the backend through named files to retrieve the PRT. The PRT is already generated because when I logged into the Windows machine itself, the PRT got generated and it's saved securely within Windows. Okay, so there's this Chrome extension talks to browsercode.exe through namespace and to fetch the PRT and then send the PRT in the request to access OneDrive or SharePoint. So this PRT is fetched and sent to Entra ID to get access tokens for OneDrive or SharePoint. Got it, right? So we are taking the PRT from the Windows system. Chrome is taking it, sending into Entra ID and to access, and it is fetching. In the response, we'll get the access token, refresh token for accessing OneDrive or SharePoint. Basically SSO, right? The SSO happens backend, and we will get logged into OneDrive or SharePoint. So this is the process that happens in the backend. So Doug Jan and multiple researchers, I think Lee Christians and some multiple researchers did the hard job of finding it out how this SSO happens in the backend, and they have created such wonderful tools like Road Token and Exchange and all. Okay. So we are going to use this tool. In this tool, will talk to the browser code.exe through namespace, and it will retrieve the PRT. Okay, it will take the PRT and it will give us the PRT. So whatever Chrome does is that that's in the backend. This road token.exe uses a road token exchange that live in the backend to do the same functionality and retrieve as the PRT. Okay. Once you have fetched the PRT from a machine, right? Fetch the PRT. When we have the PRT in hand, we can, if you see, we can send it in. We can directly access Azure resources like OneDrive, SharePoint, or Outlook, or anything. Just that we need to go to the login.microsoftonline.com or any Azure resource that we want to access, right? Clear all the cookies, create a cookie called XMS refresh token credential. Okay. Again, it will be confusing because most of the time we have heard like PRT is a JWT token, but here we are going to use a JWT token with a cookie within a cookie. Like we are going to send the token within a cookie parameter to the server. Okay. So there will be some confusing terms like where they would have mentioned PRT as a cookie sometimes, PRT as a token sometimes. This would be pretty confusing. Okay, but PRT itself is a JSON web token. Okay, but we are going to in the request to the server, right, to access to log in to Microsoft Azure accounts, right. We are going to set a cookie called XMS refresh token credential, and we are going to enter the value as the value that we got from the second command. Road token.exe nonce. Okay, we're going to enter the value. Once we set it, we are manually creating this cookie using the browser developer tools. Once you have done it, right, once you refresh the page, we will automatically get logged into the user Azure resource. Like we will automatically log into the Azure portal itself. We will won't ask for any kind of username, password, or MFA. It won't ask for anything. Once we have retrieved the PRT, once we have set the cookie, it will automatically log into the user account. That is the beauty of PRT. Once we are able to retrieve this PRT, right, you can use it anywhere and access that particular user, log into the Azure portals as that particular user without any username, password, or MFA. Okay, and then this is one way, like where we are directly logging to the application. Another way is again using AID internals. AID internals, as I mentioned, is a very good set of tool set which has multiple functionality. Like it has 100 plus scripts, I think so, close to 100 scripts. It can be used for multiple functionality. Here, once we have generated the PRT token, right, we can, using that PRT token, we can generate access tokens. We can generate access token for, if you see here, then the second command, we can generate access token for any service. In this scenario, we are generating the access token for Graph PowerShell, Graph API, sorry, for accessing Graph APIs. Here, the service can be anything like Azure AD Join or any other service. Okay, it has multiple scripts. So here we are using the PRT token that was fetched. Okay, we are requesting for access tokens. to access a particular service or API. Here we are requesting for access tokens to contact Graph APIs using this particular AID internal power toolset. Yeah. Or else we can use road reckon is also with the PRT that was generated, we can use road reckon also for enumeration. But if you want to use AID internals also, or connecting Azure AD PowerShell module or Microsoft Graph PowerShell module, anything. But if you are using Azure AD PowerShell module or AZ PowerShell module or Graph PowerShell module, right? We would request some access token, either username password, or we would require some access token. That access token we can generate using the AID internals tools. That is the process, whole process happening here. Any doubts here on how we can obtain PRT and then use the PRT to access retrieve access token?
ப்ரோ எனக்கு கொஞ்சம் டவுட்டா இருக்கு.
சொல்லுங்க
இல்ல பிஆர்டி டோக்கனுக்கும் பிஆர்டி டோக்கன் போட்டிருக்கீங்க, பிஆர்டி குக்கி போட்டிருக்கீங்க. அதான் எனக்கு டவுட்டா இருக்கு. ரெண்டு சேம் தானே?
கன்ஃபியூஸ் ஆகும் நான் சொன்னேன். அது டோக்கன் தான் ப்ரோ ஜேசன், அது டோக்கன் தான் ப்ரோ, ஜேசன் வெப் டோக்கன் தான், ஓகேங்களா? ஆனா அந்த டோக்கனை எடுத்து நம்ம வந்து ஒரு குக்கியா செட் பண்ணி நம்ம வந்து அசூர் போர்ட்டலுக்கு லாகின் பண்ணோம்னா நம்ம வந்து அதை குக்கியா செட் பண்ணி அனுப்பலாம். அனுப்புனா அது வந்து எஸ்எஸ்ஓ மூலியமா லாகின் ஆயிரும், ஆட்டோமேட்டிக்கா லாகின் ஆயிரும், யூசர் நேம் பாஸ்வேர்டு எம்எஃப் எல்லாம் கேட்காது. அதுதான் ஐடியா, கான்டெக்ட். அது ஜேசன் வெப் டோக்கன் தான், அதோட ஃபார்மேட் வந்து ஜேசன் வெப் டோக்கன் தான். அதான் நம்ம ஒரு குக்கியா செட் பண்ணி நம்ம அனுப்பணும் இந்த லாகின் பண்றது.
ஓகே.
இந்த அந்த குக்கி நேம் வந்து இது XMX ரெஃப்ரெஷ் டோக்கன் கிரெடென்ஷியல். இந்த இது குக்கி நேம், இது வேல்யூல வந்து இந்த ஜேசன் வெப் டோக்கன் போட்டு நம்ம அனுப்புவோம். PRT which is actual PRT. இது கொஞ்சம் ரொம்ப கன்ஃபியூசிங்கா இருக்கும் எனக்கு படிக்கும்போது.
ஓகே ஓகே. சோ ரோட் ரெக்கான் ஆத்துங்கற கமெண்ட்டும் கீழ வந்து ரோட் ரெக்கான் ஆத்துங்கற கமெண்ட்லயும் பாராமீட்டர் PRT குக்கிங்கிறதும் வந்து PRT டோக்கன் தான்.
அதுவும் PRT டோக்கன் தான். அதேதான். பிகாஸ் நீங்க பாத்தீங்கன்னா நிறைய இடத்துல இங்க PRT டோக்கன், இது வந்து AID இன்டர்னல்ஸ்ல PRT டோக்கன் யூஸ் பண்ணிருக்காங்கல்ல. இது AID இன்டர்னல்ஸ். இங்க PRT டோக்கன் யூஸ் பண்றதும் இதே இங்க இருந்து நம்ம ஜெனரேட் பண்ண வேல்யூ தான். ரோட் டோக்கன் EXE வச்சு நம்ம PRT ரிட்ரைவ் பண்ணுவோம், அது வேல்யூ தான். இங்க இந்த ரோட் ரெக்கன்ல PRT குக்கிங் போடுறோம்னா அதுவும் அதே வேல்யூ தான். ஆனா இவங்க பிளாக்ல AID இன்டர்னல் பிளாக்ல பாத்தீங்கன்னா டோக்கன் போட்டிருப்பாங்க. ரோட் ரெக்கன் பிளாக் இந்த டர்க் ஜாண்ட் இருக்காருல்ல, அவரோட பிளாக்ல நீங்க போய் பாத்தீங்கன்னா அவர் ஃப்ரண்ட்ல ஃபர்ஸ்ட் பேராகிராஃப்லயே ஒன்று சொல்லியிருப்பாரு, PRT டோக்கன் நான் இது குக்கிங் தான் இனிமேல் ரெஃபர் பண்ண போறேன், நான் இதை குக்கிங் தான் சொல்லி ரெஃபர் பண்ணுவேன், அப்படியே பண்ணுங்க அவரே போட்டிருப்பாரு அந்த ஆர்டிகல்ல.
ஓகே ஓகே.
PRT டோக்கன் நான் குக்கிங் தான் இனிமேல் ரெஃபர் பண்ணுவேன் அப்படின்னு அவர் அந்த ஆர்டிகல்ல போட்டிருப்பாரு. ஸோ எனக்கும் இது கொஞ்சம் கன்ஃபியூசிங்கா தான் இருந்தது. ஆனா என்னோட அண்டர்ஸ்டாண்டிங் படி இது ஜேசன் வெப் டோக்கன் தான். அது உள்ள ஒரு ரெஃப்ரெஷ் டோக்கன் இருக்கும், ஒரு வேல்யூ இருக்கும், பிரைமரி செட் டு 2, அண்ட் தென் ஒரு நான்ஸ் இருக்கும், இல்லாட்டி டைம் லிமிட் இருக்கும் அந்த ஜேசன் வெப் டோக்கன் வேல்யூல.
ஓகே ஓகே ஃபைன், புரிஞ்சது.
ஸோ அதை வந்து நம்ம குக்கியில நம்ம செட் பண்ணலாம். இங்க அது சம்டைம்ஸ் அது குக்கிங் பேசுவாங்க, சம்டைம்ஸ் அது டோக்கன் பேசுவாங்க. பட் அல்டிமேட்டா அசூரை பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் ஒன் திங் இஸ் லைக் ultimately we have to have username, password, or to our client ID and secret to authenticate to Azure, or we need access token. Once we get an access token, we can talk to you, like provided the audience there will be a variable called like a value called audience within the JSON web protocol. If the audience is for Microsoft team, we can talk to Microsoft team. If the audience is for Microsoft Graph, we can talk to Microsoft Graph API. If the audience is for ARM, we can talk to management.azure.com APIs. So the audience we have to see. And like I would have mentioned a tool in the previous slide, like token tactics, where we can basically play with the audience parameter. Actually within the token, right, we can play with the audience parameter. And once we have one access token, using the same access token we can access any service like Outlook, Team, OneDrive, SharePoint, anything. If at all we are going to authenticate individually, there will be different access tokens created for different services. For example, access token created for SharePoint will have the audience as SharePoint, something like that, or Microsoft have something like that. Created for Teams will have a different audience. The access token created for Outlook will have a different audience. But we can generally play with it, change the audience and authenticate to other services. But ultimately, to authenticate or talk to any APIs, right, either we need client ID secret certificate, username, password, or access tokens. Once we have the access token, We can use all the existing toolset and talk to any APIs that we want.
Mani, I think you just explained it, but like I'm not native Tamil speaker.
Sorry, I'm not able to hear properly. Sorry.
Yeah, I was asking that. I think you just answered that question. However, I could not get it because like part of it was in your Tamil language. So, did you say that for getting an access token, we can have the audience, we can change the audience to
Yeah.
any of the API service uh, for this Entra ID access for the resources?
Yes. Yes. And underneath, I don't know how it works, but the token tactics tool is for that purpose. Actually. We can retrieve one access token, and using that access token, we can uh, use it to access other services. That maybe
So then we don't have to use PRT for that after getting access token, correct?
PRT is used to request access tokens from an Entra ID joint machine. From an Entra ID joint machine, PRT is used to request access tokens. I'm saying once we have the access token, right, we can play with. Well, this is not related to this PRT topic. That was a different thing. Once we have the access token, and I was just saying we can play with the token to authenticate to different services.
No, no, my question was regards to where you have commented the line just below the row token.exe.
Okay, okay, this one.
Generated token with that header XMS refresh token and credential. So with that, we are getting the generated token. And you said earlier that we can log into the dashboard and say, from the
Yes,
for the victim's account. Correct.
yes.
So is it all that is necessary to access the services as well once we are into the dashboard, or we still need to create PRT? Sorry, we still need to create the access token from the generated token.
No, for the GUI part, right? Accessing the web portal, we don't have to. We don't have to. It automatically happens in the backend. You're talking about this point, right? The generated token can be used
Yes,
either as a
yes.
cookie or HTTP request tracker. So in this, we are
Yeah.
going to just send the PRT. Okay, just send the PRT. It will automatically generate the access token in the backend. That we don't have to worry about in this particular scenario. But if you
Acha.
want to use tools like Connect Azure AD, or if you want to use Microsoft PowerShell Graph PowerShell module, or AZ PowerShell module, then we need an access token. That access token we can create using these scripts. This get
Okay.
AAD int access token for AAD graph, right? In this scenario. Does that answer your question?
Yes, partly, but another part of this question is that would we really be requiring to use this graph APIs? Are there any use case scenarios where we would use this instead of just using the dashboard?
Say if you want to do the attack part, right? Like either you can log into the GA itself directly. Okay. If you want to do some attacks with the AAZ PowerShell module, right? Then we can generate the access token. Only if you want to do some attacks or querying, if you want to automate something, right? If it's up to you, like if you want to, what I can say, instead of going to the GUI and enumerating anything manually, if you want the privilege, like the comfort of enumerating everything using existing tool set, right? I will come to a point. Okay, if you see here, there's a tool set called Graph Runner. Okay, the Graph Runner we can. I think this Graph Runner it can use username like we can. This is a post exploitation tool, Graph Runner. Okay, either we can authenticate using. I think I'm not sure. Like I can use login password or we can use access token. I'm sure of like we can use as access token. Okay, so the access token that we generate there, right? We can provide it. Provide that access to the provide that access token to this Graph Runner tool. Okay, this Graph Runner tool will like is as a list of commands. It will fetch everything for us. Like if we ask it to dump all the emails, it will dump all the emails associated with that particular user. Uh, if you ask it is ask it to dump all the directory information, right? Users, groups within that particular tenant, it will dump everything like in a particular format. Okay, so that particular for that automation purpose only, for dumping everything from a CLI perspective, for that comfort only, we are generating access tokens for us to use it with different tools. we don't have to do it like once as a proof of concept. We can generally log into the portal itself and show it as a proof of concept. But if we want to do additional implementation through CLI scripts, we can generate access token.
Yeah, yeah. Makes sense. Uh, Mainly it's for the CLI, using CLI based tools. So that's why.
Yes,
But
yes.
however, we can also use the APIs which are there uh,
Sorry.
directly to hit the. We can directly hit the Microsoft Graph API endpoints as well after the dashboard. I think
Yes,
that
that
should
also
also
we can
work.
do. That also we can do. But
Okay.
that will be like here if you see, that
2-bit
also we can
reviews.
do.
Yeah, got it.
I would have included a screenshot somewhere.
Yeah,
Here,
the
here,
mm,
here we are hitting the Microsoft API endpoints also with that value, like whatever value we have, right? The dollar token, if you see something like just for an example, I'm saying. Okay.
yeah,
With
yeah.
the token value, we can hit the API directly, but underneath these tools implement are going to talk to these APIs only, but it happens at the back end indirectly, right? Underneath, instead of manually doing all these things like defining the variables and then doing automation, these tools should already have this functionality implemented in the backend. So we are going to use the tools. That's the only purpose we are going to generate access tokens. Otherwise, it is not required.
Yeah, and if I can recall correctly, I think Road Recon is Python based.
Um, no,
Hello.
no, I don't think it's Python based. No,
Okay,
no, it's not Python script. It's not a Python script.
okay. And to generate the PRT, where in the second line you wrote row token.exe and then the launch. Is there any other like instead of using an executable, because I think this has to be run all on Windows machine, right?
Hmm.
So I think it won't work in Linux based machine where like PWSH is there.
Okay, yeah, Entra ID, as far as I have seen, right, this PRT comes into the picture, I think, only in three kind of scenarios. Windows, iOS, and Android. It don't work on, you see, Windows, iOS, and Android.
Okay.
Like PRT specifically, right? Microsoft has support for only for Windows, iOS, and Android. It doesn't support Linux or macOS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it
Okay.
can be, this can be run only on a Windows machine. Yeah, to answer your question.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Got it.
Android, I'm not sure, but mobile application testing, maybe if they are storing it somewhere, we can try to retrieve the PRT in mobile application testing. Okay. The second one, this was the like way like where we have to bypass the EDR, run the road token, and then retrieve the PRT, and then release the PRT to fetch an access token. The another method, this again, this is the most I would say like this is even trickier, and it might not work at all because we have to execute mimikatz. We have to make sure like there are multiple detection rules for mimikatz. We have to again if TPM is enabled, right? Uh, TPM protection is enabled, right? Even if you use mimikatz, we won't be able to retrieve the PRT. The entire blog is here available within AAD. This particular all these commands were taken from the AAD internals. This particular post on PRT. Okay. This only works if you are able to bypass EDR. It's very tricky because even if you go on to execute VDR, there are multiple memory protection mechanisms we have to bypass, and then multiple detection we have to bypass, like uh, bypass the detection rules framed by blue team, and then even after that, there is no way we can retrieve the PRT using mimikatz if TPM is enabled, if memory protection is enabled. Okay. But if at all TPM is not enabled on the Windows machine, and if you are able to bypass EDR and the routine, then we can execute mimikatz, retrieve the clear key, and then use the PRT key here. If you see this command, generate a new PRT token with the nonce. So first of all, we have to get the clear key and the PRT key, and using these two values, we can generate our own PRT token. Using this, we can generate as many PRT tokens that we want, provided we are able to bypass EDR and all these things. Once again, like once if we generate a PRT token, we can use the PRT token to generate an access token and use it with our CLI based automation tools. This the another one. This again, this came from the AAD internals blog only. This is also there is another scenario where we can uh, register our own device actually. Someone asked like whether we can register our own application. We can register our own device also. I have in this scenario we are registering a fake device that doesn't exist. Join a existent device to Azure AD. We can register a fake device to the Azure Entra ID directly. In, for example, to start with, initially we are logging into Azure Entra ID. We have to fetch like we would have, in the previous example we would have seen a scenario, right? We have to, using the PRT token, we have to fetch an access token for a particular service. In this scenario we are fetching the token for graph APIs. Okay? But here in this scenario, this is again an AAD internal tool. We are fetching an access token for AD join service, Azure AD join service, which is a different service actually, apart from graph API. As I mentioned, if you see the second line here, under the hood, it makes a request with client ID as MS Graph. This, if you run this script, right, under in the backend, it will use the client ID as my MS Graph PowerShell module. This MS Graph PowerShell module will have this client ID. The A is at CLI, A is a PowerShell module, Azure AD, all have a different client ID. Microsoft Teams have a different client ID. So everything is documented. Most of the client ID is public, and I think it's documented here in this URL that I mentioned, right? First party apps, client IDs. Look, application IDs of commonly used Microsoft applications. Okay, and so this will talk to the device registration service and create an access token as the audience as device registration service. So ultimately, we have to log in. If your MFA is enforced, we have to log in with username, password, and once we run the script, right, get AAD internal access token for AAD there. Right? It will ask us to give our credentials, username, password, and if MFA is enforced, we have to log in through MFA. Once you have done the authentication, it will talk to the device registration service and give us an access token. And using that access token, which is specifically for device registration service with the client ID, this one, we can register a fake device to Azure Entra ID and then generate our own PRT. Now we are registering. In the previous example, we would have used our existing Azure AD joint machine, but here we are creating a fake device and then adding it to Entra ID, and using the fake device, we are generating our own PRT. Just for fun. This I would say just for fun or for persistent access actually. We don't have to do it, but we can do it. We are doing it. That's it. Again, this implementation we can do, registering a device, right? We can do both with AAD internals and road token exchange. The road tools, right? We can do both with Azure AAD internals toolset as well as road tokens. Okay. I don't want to go through everything, but we are doing the same thing. We are registering a fake device, okay, with like a device type or name and our bit information, 64-bit or 34-bit, 32-bit. Sorry, we are registering a device. Once we are registered a device, right? Once the registration is successful, right? It will automatically store a device certificate in the current directory. Once you have done the registration using these two commands, right, it will automatically create some certificate keys for the particular device, and it will save in the current directory. Using those certificate keys, we can request for PRT, and using the PRT, we can again generate an access token, similar to what we have seen in the past. No, now we are registering a device using the certificates that were generated as part of device registration. We are requesting PRTs, and using the generated PRTs, we are requesting access tokens. So this is the entire set of commands. Just for understanding purpose, I would mention the commands for Azure AAD internals as well as road token. We can do this device registration and get the PRT using both AAD internals as well as road token exchange. So, okay, coming to the last slide. Microsoft Intune, like any organization, they would have multiple devices like Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and bring your own device policy. They will be using Android or iOS devices to access work organization accounts, right? Work email or something. And we so for managing all these devices, right, across all the Windows, Mac OS as well as Android iOS, right? We use Microsoft Intune. Basically, we use it to, in very simple terms, we use it to push policies, like push applications, applications that are vetted or authorized by the organization for usage, uh, um, like Teams, Slack, for example. Or if you want to enforce a password policy, we can do it using like very simple terms. If you want to enforce a password policy, like the user has to use only um, uh, 15 character password or 19 character password, like that, we can do it using Microsoft Intune. And if you want to configure a Windows machine or Mac OS machine as per CAS benchmarks, Linux machine as per the CAS benchmark, we can enforce it using Microsoft Intune. If you want to do some registry changes to for LSAS protection, all these kind of configuration, compliance, and management across our organization managed machines, right? From everything from laptop to mobile devices, we can do using Microsoft Intune. Now, what we can do, like here there are Microsoft Intune comes under Microsoft Office, Microsoft 365 suite of application. Okay, here there are directory roles defined like Intune administrator or Intune. There are directory roles, like I don't remember exactly, but there are directory roles defined like Intune administrator and other privileges that will allow us to either read the automation scripts that are used by Microsoft Intune or modify it. So, say for example, if you want to, as I mentioned, Microsoft Intune can be used to publish applications to the endpoint devices, Windows, Mac OS, or anything. Or it can be run some. It can be used to make some registry changes or do some automation jobs using PowerShell scripts. So when you are pushing these PowerShell scripts through Microsoft Intune for managing Windows devices, the PowerShell scripts run as system with run with system privileges. And provided we have the directory role, we have access to the Microsoft Intune. I have the necessary directory role as a Microsoft Intune administrator. Then I can look into those scripts for credentials, or I can modify the PowerShell script with a malicious script for a reverse shell or a C2 beacon, anything. And this get executed again across all the Windows machines with system privileges. So that I can compromise the entire fleet of, if I'm an Intune administrator, I can compromise an entire organization of all the machines using this particular privilege. Okay? And I can also publish malicious application instead of the intended applications, right? I can push a malicious Chrome application or publish a malicious Firefox application to all the endpoint devices. And if they are using, we can compromise all the endpoint devices here. So that is the idea behind Microsoft Intune. Only if you have the necessary permissions, directory roles. That's it. So coming to other vectors, like there are other revenues also, like conditional access policies bypass. Basically, Microsoft, say for example, there is a conditional access policy saying we have to log into Azure only from managed devices. When I say managed, it is managed using Microsoft Intune or Enter ID joint, right? But if you have to log into Azure only for there is a conditional access policy, okay, that was defined by the admins, and they say we have to log into Azure only from Enter ID joint or managed machines like Microsoft Intune managed machine. There are ways to bypass it. There are ways to bypass it. If you see this tool token Smith, there are ways where we can bypass this conditional access policies. Under the hood, this uses different client IDs and different redirect URLs to confuse Microsoft and then log in from a machine which is not a company managed machine. So effectively bypassing conditional access policy. I don't want to go into it because already we have covered multiple things, but this token Smith tool has a bypass for conditional access policies specific to Microsoft Intune. But there are other conditional access bypass policies, conditional access policies. There are other bypasses for this CAP that exist, where they have restriction, but we will be able to bypass it. And another one, like say for example, if they are syncing on-prem user account to Azure AD using Azure AD SSO account, there are multiple blogs on this, like lateral movement from on-prem Active Directory to cloud Azure AD, or from Azure AD to on-prem Active Directory. There are multiple blogs actually. So even we can use Azure internal AD internal toolset to dump the sync sync credentials or MSO sync user accounts or Azure ADSSO computer account password hashes, and then do the lateral movement from on-prem to Azure AD. So this is a big vector, the Entra ID connect, right? This is a big vector which we cannot cover in this session. But if in future, if time permits, we can cover the Entra ID attack vector in detail in next session actually. But there are many things here like pass-through authentication, password hash synchronization, and ADFS authentication. There are attack vectors for each of these synchronization method, as well as how we can compromise the synchronization user accounts as well as the computer account that is used for synchronization. These are the tools like the Azure Round, much like Blooddown for enumeration, Storm Spotter for enumeration, Monkey 365 for assessing Entra ID. The best configuration, it will suggest the best configuration. Basically, user should not give consent to application to avoid illicit consent grant attack. Then what kind of permissions guest users have access, what kind of access that a guest user would have on an Azure tenant by default. So all these best practices, my Monkey 365 will suggest only the best practices. Graph Runner, as I mentioned, instead of retrieving, say we have a mail permissions, mail read permission, instead of looking into each mail individually through by automating, hitting the APIs through by writing an automation script by Python or some other means, right? We can use this graph runner tool to dump everything from Entra ID, everything like user groups, roles, application devices, everything. Yeah, we can retrieve all the information with just a particular command. So instead of automating everything manually, team filtration is also for a different same purpose, like similar purpose. Reference, I would have mentioned AID internals. Like I would have gone through multiple blogs, Microsoft blogs, AID internals, DevJam. I had done some courses in Pentest Academy as well as Cyber Warfare Labs, so I was able to understand a few concepts, and also on the job experience. That's it.